Um, okay, welcome very much to session number 4, which is African Perspectives. My name is Jeffrey Summit, and I'm very excited about this panel because a whole part of my work has been in the United States, but a whole other part of my work has been centered in Uganda. And I have great enthusiasm to hear my colleagues who are presenting today to do their papers. So our first paper is titled "Ruptures, Junctures, and Difference: The Place of Music and Dance in Framing Tradition in a Plural Religious Ritual Setting." And our first speaker, and I'm honored to introduce Daniel Kodzo Avorgbedor, who is now on post-retirement teaching and research contract at the University of Ghana in Legon, and previously taught at the Ohio State University in Columbus, where he also served as the coordinator of the ethnomusicology program. His research focused on urban ethnomusicology, African diaspora studies, the sacred secular interface in contemporary Ghanaian Christianity, and popular culture. And he edited the book, The Interrelatedness of Music, Religion, and Ritual in African Performance Practice. Please welcome Daniel.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the introduction. Yes. Okay, I think I will begin by sharing my screen. And should we? Let me see if we can. Okay. Can you all see?
Yes.
Good. Okay. So I just need to move it. Okay. I'm glad to be part of this group, and I hope I can bring some new ideas and resources to the table. As a disclaimer, I know the subject is loaded, so many dimensions. So obviously, I'm not able to address all of these components. And therefore, I would like to highlight the interrelated sites and tensions, that is ruptures and raptures, interfaces and correspondences between the multifaceted Christian experience and notions of tradition and modernity, especially in the Ghanaian context. The paper argues that one significant area to meaningfully explore these ruptures and raptures is through the enduring ontologies of the sacred and the secular, especially as a single continuum, not separate dualities, especially in structuring, and yet extended phenomenal impact of the affective qualities of the performative, that is music and related symbols. And as we'll demonstrate later on in this paper. Okay, I've already alerted some of you to the fact that I'm drawing on recent field research work as late as July of this year. And again, I hope I'll have time to share with you some of the visual items. Before I do so, it's very important to ground my topic in my personal background, especially the interest in the interface of the secular and the sacred. For example, 2009, I did a workshop titled The Primacy of the Local Ontologies in Understanding the Sacred Secular Continuum in African and African American Religious Orientations at OSU, the Center for the Study of Religions. In 2005, I did a paper at the SEM meeting, which I addressed the secular sacred continuum also as a subset of the larger subject of bending, melding, and mending pitches, hybridity, and the critic's voice in African American art music. And then in 2007, I presented another paper and a workshop titled Sacred Spaces in Secular Places, Popular Culture, Commodification, and Dialectics of the Sacred and Secular in Contemporary African-American Christian Music and Dance. That was at Black Religion and Spirituality Conference in East Lansing. And again, with that, let me move on to some of the ideas I have regarding the continuum of the sacred and secular. So basically, I need to see much of this. Okay. I have some working research questions, premises, and I just want to quickly outline some of these because they're central to where I'm coming from. Number one, that there are enduring problems with the Western traditions and categories of sacred and secular, and these are challenged by examples from African-derived institutions and practices. Two, that the sacred-secular continuum is best understood as everyday practice, the quotidian, as articulated in African and many African diasporic communities. And then three, not four, an understanding of the sacred-secular continuum is further understood from the perspectives of the global, international, and transnational processes of cultural production, reinvention, and commodification. 4, 5, that the mutual engagement between religion and popular culture in the African and African-American contexts is facilitated and best articulated in contemporary performance and religious ritual traditions. Number 6, 5, that a solid and comprehensive theological outlook on the African Christianity and spirituality in general must acknowledge this dynamic continuum of the sacred secular in specific ways. 6, 7, research projects on African-American spirituality and which are informed by the sacred secular premises will foster a deeper understanding and appreciation of the variety, quality, function, and role of the performing arts and symbols in the history of Christianity in general. And then the last item here on the premises, that the arts possess unique qualities of appeal, enchantment, and a general affect, which facilitates and thus justifies the transcending of the public-private, sacred-profane, sacred-secular categories. And quickly, I've been working with a lot of sources, especially those which I agree with my reasoning, and I just want to highlight some of them from the literature. For example, again, when you read the first quote right here, there's an emphasis on the blurring of the spiritual and the secular, talking about the Black church. And this is coming from a book edited by the well-known specialist in African-American religion, Albert Raboteau. And then again, the idea of blurring the boundaries in our own circle of music. Guthrie Ramsey talks a lot about the boundaries have blurred more than ever before, the sacred and secular. And then going on further, there is also from South Africa, Carol Miller, writing about the South African musical traditions, concludes one way that it might be that the secular sacred dichotomy in Black music creativity might have far greater currency as an integrative paradigm than a dualistic opposition. And on, maybe a couple more, that should be it. Talking about contemporary music, rap, hip hop, what does it have to do with the idea of sacred secular continuum? So for example, bringing the noise, conjuring spirit, rap as spiritual practice. So in that book, we are talking about, and here again, the intersections between rap and religion are many. Rap music's spiritual economy is not an otherworldly alternative to what some have called music's political economy. You can go on. And then I think the last one here, Guthrie Ramsey talking about Thomas Dorsey gospel origins. Again, he's saying that this tendency for hybridity links gospel to the larger world of Black diasporic religious practices to which it belongs. Again, it's a question of blending. So when we talk about the sacred and secular, on the onset, we are engaging related discourses, hybridity, syncretism, and on and on. But again, no matter how much we argue, my position is this, that the sacred secular continuum is a fundamentum in many African societies, and by extension, the African diasporas. And the recent fieldwork projects illustrate this relationship very well. And also, some of you might be familiar with some recent writings, especially the one published in Ethnomusicology on one of the Ghana's foremost composers, theologians. It's good to situate this in context, especially in my paper. And I'm going to quote Stephen Tuppening. The title of his paper is African Musical Hybridity in the Colonial Context, an analysis of Ephraim Amu's then the work. Now, his argument conclusion says, these and other articles by Ghanaian scholars have introduced Amu's music to the global scholarly community, but the theory of how Amu's musical creativity contributed to national development in Ghana has not yet emerged. I suggest that the hybridity represented in the composition challenged colonial binaries at a key historical moment in the emergence of Ghanaian national histories. Hybridity is evident in this work, not only in the combination of European and African stylistic elements, but also in the blurring of the boundary between religion and culture. Now he stopped right there. My point here, an argument again, is that he needs to approach the idea, the notion of the sacred secular continuum at a deeper level of analysis. And one way you can do that is to look at the biography of the Ghanaian composer Amu. And I proffer that it is mainly Amu's sensibilities and general grounding in local ontologies and practice of the sacred secular continuum that qualify his overall standing in the Ghanaian culture and spheres of creative expression. In other words, no matter how many conclusions you make, how strong possible they may appear, you cannot elide or overlook the sacred continuum factor, especially the African context, and here, according to Turpin, in one person's life and his works. So I just want to make that preliminary remarks. And again, I'm sure time is running. So what I want to do is to quickly play a couple of examples from the field. I'll play all of them at once so that we can have some questions later on, how they can clarify my arguments. Okay. So the first one, you just take a look.
Sorry, Daniel, I'm afraid we still look at your presentation, the text only.
Okay, I hope you're able to hear the organ, right?
Yes, but was only audio or also a video?
Pardon?
Was it only an audio file or was also a video?
Oh, it's a video. Oh, you didn't see the video?
No, I think you shared only not the desktop, but only the presentation. So you didn't move from one to another.
Oh, okay. So let me see. Stop sharing. Okay, share again.
Best to share desktop so that you can move from every program you want. From one program to another.
Share desktop. Here? Okay.
Perfect.
Can you see it now? It's okay.
Yes.
Okay, sorry.
Yes.
Okay, thanks. Okay, so briefly, that's so the
Again,
chief.
we just have 1 minute remaining.
Okay, so let me go ahead and play the other ones quickly. Let's see. Okay, and the final one quickly. Okay, so I just want to give you an idea of how these indigenous faiths, religions are coming together, rituals all coming together. So the last one you saw is the chief going to church to give thanks, Thanksgiving service, right? But after passing through all the indigenous rituals, including the slaughtering of sheep, and he has to pass over the blood to the sacred space. And there's a priest, an indigenous priest, accompanying him all the time. And there you see the choir. When the former chief was being buried, the choir was there, and the local priest was there. There was an indigenous libation performed at the center. And so you see the traditional performances leading the coffin also, and the choir in between. So there are questions of center. What is the center? Tradition, Christianity, or new inventions? So they come into play in many ways. And I have several, 5 more clips to show you, but for the lack of time, maybe discussion time, I can show you 2 more to clarify certain points.
Great.
Okay, yeah. And I have a short paragraph conclusion, which I can read later during discussion.
Great.
Thanks.
Daniel, thank you so much. It's so painful to cut you off. We want to be able to hear more, but hopefully during the discussion you'd be able to share more.
Great, thanks.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you.
Great. If you could stop sharing your screen, that would be great.
Yes.
Thank you so much. Okay, so Daniel, thank you.
Sure, thank you for that. Yes.
Our next presenter is Jean Ngoya Kidula, and she is professor of music and ethnomusicology at the University of Georgia in the United States. Her research is centered on ritual and religious music of Africa and its historic and present diaspora, centering on Christianity. Her award-winning book, a great book, Music in Kenyan Christianity, Loguli Religious Song, exemplifies her specific focus on East Africa. She also interrogates the canons in music studies in Africa and in the U.S. And the title of her talk is Interrogating the Word and Its Application Through Musical Arts, Passages in African Christianity. Please, Jane.
Thank you, Professor Summit, for that introduction. I'm going to share my screen. So we are at the same place. To optimize the sound. I hope you can all hear me. And I hope you can see my screen.
Yes.
I changed the title a little bit to make it more into English, Interrogating the Word and its Application in African Christianity through Musical Arts. I begin my discussion based on the premise that Christianity has irrevocably been central in African ways of identifying since the beginning of the modern era, whether through or because of the experiences of enslavement and colonialism, and also in their aftermaths. One might argue that it was not only Christianity that initiated the process of the Africans' modern identity. That is true. However, other religions and worldviews were often pitted against Christianity, so that while it may not have been the primary religion for some, Christianity, particularly the brand associated with Europe and its diaspora, was often invoked as the contrasting space from where larger political, social, and economic decisions were made, and also as a basis from which policies of various kinds that affected African lives were framed and enacted. Music has been an enduring expression, response, and archive of these African experiences and encounters with European Christianity. The evidence has been witnessed in sounds and other related artistic manifestations, in products such as hymnals, recordings, and performances, in music's employment in private quotidian life and in public events, in spiritual and economic forms of engagement, and in the creation as well as adoption of new and diverse technologies that facilitated the exchange of ideas. In short, music's Christian label on Africans is evidenced in myriad omnipresent ways. I want to focus my attention on some ways musicians interrogate Christianity, particularly those who operate in the popular commercial industry. While I will situate my discussion in Kenya, where I have done most of my field work, these musicians and their work have global reach through the mass media, through their tools of trade such as the styles of music they engage, the languages they use, and the issues they address, and also because of the historical and recent travel and settlement of Africans across the globe. As such, I can contend that the musicians embrace, engage with, critique, and repackage Christianity for their public survival, identity, belonging, and fundamental right. In May 2020, hip-hop musician Julius Owino, let me just make sure I have that. Julius Owino, who is known by the artistic name Giuliani, note the spelling, it's not like the New York mayor, he declared that he was no longer going to perform gospel music. Giuliani is a well-known musical icon who began his successful career as part of one of the pioneering successful secular rap collective known as Uko Fulani Mau Mau that thrived in Nairobi's Dandora estate. Uko Fulani, as you can see on the screen, is an acronym for Upendo Kote, Ole Wenu Ombeni Funzo la Alietuumba Njia Iwepo, and that's the translation over there from their website. And Mau Mau is the name of Kenyan freedom fighters for independence from the colonial era. The collective stylistic tool of trade was hip-hop, with rap as the central musical expression. They were known for describing life in the hood and for socially conscious lyrics. They went on hiatus for about 10 years and have recently reconverged, and they also spread to other parts of Kenya and Tanzania. Rap at the time that the collective was formed in the early 2000s was perceived as unacceptable as a conduit for Christian religious song. Therefore, Giuliani's crossover into Christian rap around 2005 was perceived as a big coup against the secular market. Anthropologist Mwenda Tarangi centered Giuliani in his discussion of Christian rap and hip-hop in his book, The Street is My Pulpit, Hip-Hop and Christianity in Kenya, that I looked at it in around 2015, but it came out in 2019, Illinois University Press. Juliani was not the first well-known Kenyan hip-hop artist, but his skills as a wordsmith in the secular market was legendary. Beyond his technical skills as a poet in Kiswahili language, he added to the labor of rap as an avenue for youth engagement with the larger public. He added an activism, mobilizing youth to action on socially conscious issues such as climate change, sustainable development, caring for the environment globally and locally, especially in the slum areas where he was situated and where Ukoo Fulani emerged. From examining the many media interviews when Juliani was asked about switching out of the Christian music market, I concluded that there was an expectation for Christian artists to always include some kind of evangelistic message in their songs. Juliani was not averse to doing that, but in his concern for calling people to action about social, environmental, and ethical issues, it appeared to me that he felt a certain textual curtailment by the expectation to create using Jewish translated stories, poetic forms, or rhetoric. He sought for greater freedom to address their realities of daily life for his publics and in language most used by the people that he targeted, drawing from what he observed on the street and applying his skill as a poet. Essentially, he was moving out of being labeled a gospel musician without renouncing his Christian beliefs of affiliation. In a conservative Christian world, that move was newsworthy. Juliani's announcement came on the heels of a successful religious single by a secular group called Heart the Band. The group is made up of Mordecai Mwinyi, Kenneth Muya, and Washira Gatama. That's the way they are sitting, that's their names, and those are their names on the screen. They released their single El Shaddai in 2019 as part of the album Made in the Streets. The single has to date garnered the largest reception of all their other work, drawing a following from both secular and religious markets. The lyrics clearly pointed to a religious message, employing the rhetoric and grammar used in Christian circles. The band crafted the single in the stylistics of popular Christian religious song, complete with ambient string sounds commonly invoked in praise and worship music. The song received a lot of airplay on religious and secular radio stations. It was adopted by worship teams as part of music sets during religious gatherings. You can find these all over the internet. However, the group itself was not, to my knowledge, invited to perform in purely religious gatherings. I'll play just a little bit of it so that you can hear the sound and see the lyrics. I have provided the translation, provided the translation of the words that are not in English so that you can make sense of those words. I hope it plays well. El Shaddai, uko na kile mina dai, ulinipenda hata kama misifai. El Shaddai, El Shaddai, El Shaddai, uko na kile mina dai, ulinipenda hata kama misifai. El Shaddai, El Shaddai, El Shaddai. He's an awesome God. Amenipa such an awesome song, and I'm never lonely. Amenipa such an awesome love. He is an awesome God, and I wanna tell it to the world. Ili wajue ni wewe, kama si wewe basi nani? Asikia landlord ako kwa njia anataka kodi, ni wewe uta provide. Na nina ngori moyoni zinanijaza wori, ila nitakuwa fine. El Shaddai, uko na kile minadai, ulinipenda hata kama misifai. El Shaddai, El Shaddai, El Shaddai. Okay, I'm just going to stop there so that I have a little bit of time, but I'm going to allow you to see the rest of the lyrics just so you can see how those lyrics really speak religious message. Heart the Band was not the first well-known Kenyan secular group to release a best-selling religious single. Sauti Sol, an even more famous secular outfit, had released Kuliko Jana, whose key lyric stated that Jesus loves me today more today than he did yesterday. The song had initially received much acclaim, but there was pushback from pastors and believers who questioned the theological implications of the signature lyric. Had the band did not receive that type of resistance, it seemed like they had passed local theological master. When I interviewed them about the song, band members decried the restrictive creative expectation imposed on Christian musicians and the religious market, lyrically and musically. In fact, they brought up Giuliani, who, like them, was a poet and wordsmith who personified the socially conscious badge. Giuliani quit the Christian gospel labeling and wanted greater freedom of lyrical expression. They were quick to point out that their song is about El Shaddai. He could be Jewish, it could be Christian, it could be Muslim. However, the video accompanying the song provides multifarious readings of the song. It obscures the meanings of the rhetorical Christianese by depicting some ways that the general believing public resolves dilemmas of daily life, such as ways of financing school fees, like you saw in that video when I played, or intermarriages between Christians and Muslims. And it also questions some assumptions about African understandings of Western popular and other theology that have been put up by religion scholars. Some of these activities that they questioned have historical roots in the history of the introduction of Western Christianity to Africa, modern Western Christianity to Africa since the 19th century, maybe earlier. They point to the civilizing project of colonialism that was embedded in that encounter and has profoundly shaped the identity of the modern African on the continent and in diaspora. It was a separation and distinction was expected between Christians and non-Christians. It was enacted in educational systems whose impact revolutionized social, economic, political engagements at the national level. But it was in kinship and social relationships that it created intense confusion, especially in everyday living. The dichotomy was also extended in the musical sphere and was reinforced by the music industry. This separation in the industry and the church of the religious with the quotidian has, in my opinion, been part of the struggle of the modern African Christian and modern African Christianity. It is contained in the way the Christian message is delivered, translated, and interpreted. The introduction of Christianity in many African spaces fused the spiritual with the political, the social, and mundane in Western ways that bifurcated the whole, separating the Christian from those who embraced other beliefs in such a manner that whole ways of life were disrupted. Rap and hip-hop artists in Kenya began to address these matters of the everyday in their musical style, in rhetorical structures and grammar, and in social and relational engagement. This was a different approach from the thrust of Christian reggaeton artists, a genre that was popular to the urban youth of a previous generation that also invoked poetic skills, with artists translating the religious message into the language of the street, but not necessarily addressing the dilemmas of social realities. Rap was even more immediate, with a variety of dialects of different cities or even different suburbs in the same city. Rap artists continually state that they observe daily life and speak about it, they speak to it. Rappers like Giuliani did not just speak about it, they mobilized people to action, but they are weary of being contained in the constrictions of the industry, particularly the Christian religious industry, which limits their verbal artistry and text relative to their understanding of the Christian mandate. This interrogation of Christianity through the arts is not just in such contemporary performances. It has been apparent in different times, in different places, spaces, in African lived worlds. So I just provided El Shaddai in its audio and video formats as one instance in our current space and time that has employed familiar global tools to assess contemporary readings and practices of Christianity in Africa. The end.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. I love the way that these papers are building on one another, and there's much to discuss. I want to remind people to please. It's a shame we can't discuss each paper right after, but if people will save their questions, and we'll be able to have a rich discussion after the next presentation. Thank you again, Professor. So our next presenter and our final presenter for this session is Brian Schrag. Brian Schrag is a senior arts consultant with SIL International and has degrees in cognitive science, intercultural studies, and ethnomusicology. He worked as a linguist translator and ethnomusicologist in Central Africa in the 1990s and 2000s, and founded the Center for Excellence in World Arts at Dallas International University in 2012. His current spheres of engagement include Christian mission, expressive arts therapies, especially related to Huntington's disease, and transformational development in communities. Routledge published Brian's book, Artistic Dynamos, in 2021. The title of his talk today is Ethnodoxology, History, Nature, and Opportunities for Dialogue. Please welcome Brian Schrag.
Thank you. I'm going to share my screen. The one that has now disappeared. It used to be right there. Hold on. Show presenter view and share. What do you see? Do you see my slide?
We see you.
You see me?
And your slide to the right of you.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I practiced this yesterday and it was perfect. It worked perfectly. So,
You should close the settings.
let me, so I need to
The
share
window of the
a different
settings on the
different screen. Let me just share again. Let's call it this one. And share. And then.
That's good.
Okay.
That's fine.
Is it finer now?
Yes.
It actually has the slide. Okay. All right. Thank you, Jeff and Svani Board and team for all your work and thoughtfulness in organizing this meeting. And I wanted to echo Jeff's anticipation of the benefits of sharing the same space again. It's my favorite memory from all the academic conferences I've been to was everyone dancing together at an ICTM meeting in Durban, South Africa. But I won't be dancing. You can if you want, but that might seem awkward. Instead, in this presentation, I'm going to describe a recent movement that connects Christian spirituality and applied ethno-arts, ethnodoxology. And this will just be a taste. Muriel Schweigisen Rigersberg, a self-identified atheist, and I, a Christ follower, are writing a chapter on ethnodoxology for the Oxford Handbook of Music and Christian Theology due out in 2023, which will contain a fuller exploration of the movement, which is global in its scope, despite my examples from Africa exclusively. First, a simple definition to set the stage. Ethnodoxology is the interdisciplinary study of how Christians in every culture engage with God and the world through their own artistic expressions. Historically, theologies informing 19th to 21st century Protestant missions lacked robust treatments of artistry and worship. Colonialist ideologies often filled this conceptual void, resulting in new Christian churches reflecting the artistic practices of missionaries' traditions at the expense of local arts. Ethnodoxology emerged in the late 20th and early 21st centuries as a reaction against these practices. Ethnodoxology's immediate antecedents included a form of applied ethnomusicology in the mid to late 20th century, including applied work by ethnomusicologists such as Prof. Kwabena Nketia, A.M. Jones, and Vida Chenoweth. This photo is of Vida in Papua New Guinea, circa 1970. She was SIL's first international ethnomusicology consultant. And there were also concurrently some Christian theologians, missiologists, pastors, and historians that began to address issues related to the diversity of local artistries in churches globally, including people such as Roberta King and John Piper. And Kwame Bediako and Lamin Sane, lots of people. Ethnodoxology coalesced as a coherent movement in the early 2000s, most saliently during the first global consultation on music and missions in 2003. Robin Harris, Paul Neely, and others, feeling a sense of isolation in their churches and organizations, founded the International Council of Ethnodoxologists, renamed the Global Ethnodoxology Network, or GEN, in 2019. Robin Harris has led GEN since its inception. I was on its board for a number of years. And the network, it's a network that consists of about 375 members in or from more than 80 countries, more than 60 of whom have doctoral degrees. Robin is also the director of the Center for Excellence in World Arts, CIWA, which I founded, a department in Dallas International University. And she happened to be my next door neighbor. CIWA has just accepted our third World Arts PhD cohort of 6 scholars. So ethnodoxology has gained momentum, producing a growing number of textbooks and other publication, literature, institutional placement in several universities, a peer-reviewed journal, divergent views and practices, and a burgeoning community of practice. This video I'm about to play for you tells one of my stories, one that resonates with many people involved in ethnodoxology. Its audience is primarily for church leaders hoping to expand their view of traditional arts. So it's not made for you in particular, but you can see our attempt to try to convince church leaders to change the way they think. If you have trouble viewing the video and it's this slightly shortened presentation format, you can watch it at the Vimeo or YouTube URLs that I have up there. And so here is the video. A 6-minute video.
When we saw the church being so different from its surroundings, and so connected to the US and Europe, but disconnected from the community around it, I knew this was not the way it should be.
Componenti in Mali,
There's so much beauty and genius and ability to communicate in the local artistic forms, but there was no place for them in the local church.
Is the sound working?
Most of what they used in the church was the trade language, Lingala, and foreign songs translated into Lingala. I really felt that the church was impoverished because of this. One of the first instruments I saw was the kundi, a harp. The kundi is normally used by one person singing mono proverbs in the mono language in the Baguru genre. I asked Pastor Gode and some of the deacons if we could meet and talk about why were the kundi and other mono instruments not being used in the church. They agreed. Eventually, during this discussion, I could tell they were starting to think about something new, about the possibility of reclaiming their instruments in their musical genres for their lives as Christians. But when we got to the genre of Baguru, the one that uses the kundi, they said, we use this to give advice to people. What if we use Baguru also to communicate scripture? I asked the church leaders how we could take a next step in using Baguru in the church. And that's when we hit our first big barrier. They said, well, remember what the first evangelist said. 50 years ago, we burned our instruments. Nobody in the church knows how to play the kundi. For them and for us, it's been a sin. Somebody mentioned Punyama, a master kundi player. What if some of the men in the church learned how to play the kundi, learned how to compose new Baguru songs from him? And so we started meeting with Punyama. He taught us how to carve the wood for the resonator and the neck. He taught us how to work the sheet metal for the top and make holes by burning through the wood. And he taught us how to string and then tune the instrument. Finally, he taught us how to play a few simple songs on the kundi. During this time, when we were Punyama's apprentices, some of the mono men came up with an innovation. They wanted to make a choir, a kundi choir, and they wanted to call it La Chorale Ayo, the love choir. I can still remember the first time I sang with the kundi choir in a church service. We were all carrying our kundis, walking in a procession up to the front of the church. Normally in this church, there's lots of amening, there's clapping, there's vocal affirmations, but this time, silence. We got up there and we were playing the song about God creating man and woman from clay, and still silence. I started getting more and more nervous, thinking that somehow we had made a mistake, and my heart just sank. And so as soon as the service was over, I went immediately to find a friend of mine, a mono friend. And I asked him, why was everybody so quiet? And he said, well, what could we do? It cut our hearts. At that point, I started to feel relief. Because it cut our hearts means that the truth of that song, the truth that God created man and woman, entered into their souls, that touched their emotions in a way that a translated hymn could never do. Since then, kundi choirs have spread from Bili to almost all of the other mono villages. And the mono church is beginning to use even more traditional art forms. Reflecting on this, Reverend Yalimoto, director of the Mono Bible Translation Project, had this to say.
Aujourd'hui, dans toutes les églises mono, nous voyons un changement radical dans la façon de vivre des chrétiens parce que le message de Dieu communiqué à travers les chansons Bagourou touche directement leur cœur.
This whole approach, getting to know communities and encouraging them to look at their own arts as gifts, as priceless resources, helps bring them into a better future.
So what might be ethnodoxology's potential and limits as a space for scholarly conversations, integrating spiritual and ethno-artistic concerns? One possible concern with implications for dialogue is that many ethnodoxologists remain as loyal critics within a wide range of organizations rooted historically in the colonialist expansions of the 18th through 20th centuries. Systemic vestiges and institutional memories may undermine their efforts to open spaces for local artistic creativity. Potentially fruitful touch points for dialogue and explorations also exist. For example, ethnodoxologists are producing novel conceptual and methodological foundations for community engagement, for engagement with communities and their artistry, melding relational priority, clear, rich imaginings of thriving and flourishing, and rigorous research and scholarship focused on artistic communication genres. To conclude, representing a trend in ethnodoxology, Roche Ntanke is a Cameroonian friend and colleague who recently led 2 workshops in Eastern Democratic Republic of Congo. His primary goal was to convince congregants, pastors, and educators that their exclusive use of songs in trade languages, pop genres, and hymns translated from European languages is ignoring rich local artistic resources and artists that could help them flourish spiritually, socially, emotionally, and physically. 2 seminaries there have invited Roche to return and start programs in ethnodoxology. He has a PhD, mostly in theology, but also in ethnomusicology. Thus ends my whirlwind tour of ethnodoxology's emergence, coalescence, and potential for dialogue. And I'll be happy to share this presentation, which contains some more resources, URLs for resources and other information. And thank you for being part of this important initiative to create a new study group in ICTM.
Brian, thank you so much. A wonderful paper and video. So we have time for discussion, and we might even, with if Svanibor agrees, go a couple minutes into the break for discussion. But let me, we have some questions in the chat, but we also are a small enough group right now that if people first want to raise their hand to ask some questions, I have questions to ask, but let's see if people in the assembled Zoom screen have questions, and then I could read questions from the chat. Well, I'm looking around. I'll start off with a question then about issues of syncretic practice. And, you know, my question is, obviously, this kind of synchronicity happens organically in many ways, where Christian and local and traditional elements become viable expressive culture. My question is about boundaries. What happens when there's inviolable boundaries, when there's non-transgressible boundaries between culture that just doesn't fit? What kind of pushback have people experienced? And I'll open it up to anybody on the panel who wants to respond.
Jean, you have most experience with pushback, I think.
Mhm.
First of all, let me just start by saying that the word syncretic is really difficult for me to swallow, as it depends on its use. It's the same with the word hybridity. That there are terms that have been used by the West that, in a sense, diminish the creative potential because it's as if these are the only places where hybridity happens or syncretism happens. But when you look at Western Christianity, there's a lot of syncretism that happened over time before it established itself as the tradition.
Sure.
It looks different from what happens in a different space. So, relative to anything in the world, anytime there's something that's new, people must look at it and test it and see how it fits and where it fits. And that's what I have found in most of my research. People testing it, seeing where it fits, different generations questioning it or pushing it. And that's just normal human work. And that's part of what I found with the rap artists, that they refuse to back down, where, like in the case that Brian described, people pushed, they didn't feel like they had the authority to push back against the missions because the authority was vested in white supremacy at the time, in the worldview that was going on, and who had power. So pushing back was much more difficult earlier than it is now, in different kinds of ways, because the shift in the societies was different. So that's why, for me, it's like different generations have pushed back in different ways on different things that are introduced. So earlier, there was a pushing back and people formed their own denominations. Then those were labeled African traditional Christian religions. And it was as if they had less value than the others that were mission run. They were labeled as like cults. Some of them may have been cults, but others were not. They were actually a response because of social realities, cultural realities, relational issues. People didn't know, how do we navigate this new world that's taking over our social, political freedoms in ways that we cannot fight, because they have more this, they have more that, and they're subjugating us. So those kinds of terms are some of the things that I push back on in the language that is used by scholars, because these are regular words that are used by scholars to describe, especially non-Western cultures, that there's hybridity, there's syncretism, as if the West doesn't have it, and it's just unfair. If there's a form, I'm very excited for it to have its own name without being said, oh, this is just an imitation of that, because you have no idea if it is an imitation or people trying to work out what it means to encounter a new technology, what it means to encounter a new way of being, what it means to have a different political dispensation, that kind of thing that happens. So I'm fighting back against language that is used in scholarship to describe these kinds of things.
Just let me ask the question. Thank you so much. I don't, in my thinking about these kind of blended traditions, I don't limit them at all to Africa. I see them happening in my backyard in Boston continually. But what language would you think would be more appropriately descriptive?
I have no idea, because English is a foreign language, but we have words in my language that the English don't know.
Thank you.
That you may have something to say about that, because yours was really, really strongly that merged the African and the non-African in ways that mine did not, and Brian's went.
Let me get. Let's get other. Thank you so much, Professor. Let's get some other questions out, and we have them. We have some questions from the YouTube broadcasting chat. Let me read one of these that comes. It's in the chat itself. It comes from Roach Natanga. Why is it that Christian groups that are very popular in the secular world are not popular in the church, the place of spirituality? Is it because they're more present in worldly circles, or because the church doesn't recognize them as its own? What is the more important, the content or the container? What makes a song spiritual or not? Is it because I sing about Jesus, God in a song, that it should be considered Christian? Again, let me open it up to the panel who wants to, anyone who wants to answer.
That person is Roche, is the person I showed a picture of, who just did a couple of ethnodoxology workshops in Eastern DRC. And Roche, that was too complicated a question.
Maybe pick one question, one of these questions.
So I would say that the work within the Christian community, where we have adopted and applied a couple of different theologies, and one in particular, the theology of incarnation, that God became a zygote in Mary's womb, and then grew up in a particular place in a Jewish home in Palestine, and that is to think about where Christianity exists. Is what would it look like if Jesus had been born and grew up in a particular community? And so it becomes an organic expression of God in the world. And so I think one way to answer that is to keep, or to point people to that theology of incarnation.
Great. Thank you. Let's, Daniel, you had a question that you put in the chat. Why don't you ask it yourself?
Oh, okay. There are two questions, really. One is for Brian. Brian, I think around 2000 or so, year 2000, I made a contact with a Reverend Father, Anglican Father, in the Uganda, an Anglican church. And he also encouraged the use of a kundi harp-like instruments, setting up a choir of those instruments. And he sent me a video recording of the group playing in a church. It has become the norm. So I'm not sure if that influenced you, or you influenced him, or what. Or independent inventions?
I don't know that person, and I would love to see that video.
I'll send you his details.
Okay, yeah, that'd be great.
Great. I think we have time for just one more question, and Irene Markov did a question. Irene, would you like to ask that?
Sure. This has something to do with a comment that you made about boundaries. So, to what degree do contexts for performance affect new forms of blended music and potentially create boundaries in the process? I guess that might be a good question for Jean.
Okay. This is, you all know that there are so many different kinds of Christianities, and they have different ways of doing stuff. And that's already a boundary that's created by different denominations who have ways of conducting their liturgies and the kinds of musics that they put in there. The other way, the other context that I can bring about is generational. But over time, you start to find some new thing coming up, and then somehow churches like have youth services, and you'll find a youth service using particular types of music and not other types of music, because that's that age. And what that creates kind of boundary, but it also breaks boundaries when you have these youth leaders now leading the main service, and they start sneaking some of the repertoire that they had, and they have to figure out so that they don't lose members, the old people. So you have to find ways to do that. But in my experience, one of the things that happens in many urban spaces, whether it's in the church or in a religious gathering, is you have a lot of different kinds of music happening in that space. So you might find people performing a hymn, a German hymn, and they mix it up with a South African song. And then they might take a mono song. And by the way, they sing them in those languages too, not just in translation. So the discussions in the US about diversity usually make me a little bit, they're a bit interesting for me, because we are so used to diversity and bringing it into the mix because of the politics of the place, that it's not strange to sing in several languages within the same service, or in different styles within the same gathering in that way, or have people who have embraced different kinds of Christianity within a kinship gathering, bring all these different types of ways that they do Christian art in that gathering, like at a funeral, like Daniel was showing, where you have something that there's an organ, and then there is other kinds of music as well that's happening there, because this is part of our lived reality. It's part of the histories that Africa has, with all these different groups from everywhere descending on any one country and setting up different kinds of shop, splitting families, but families still come together at gatherings and bring all these different things together. So depending on what brand of Christianity has been embraced by a family, say at a funeral, you might have the funeral conducted in that brand of Christianity. But in surrounding musical events to that, you will have different kinds of things happening. So like when my father died, my cousin, who was deeply embedded in indigenous religious practice, came with his indigenous stuff to celebrate my dad, who was a conservative Pentecostal. And so there were different kinds of things that happened with that. But his father was like Salvation Army, so we had brass bands as well. So we have these kinds of mixtures that for my American group, they look unusual, but for us, it's extremely normal to have that kind of diversity. So the idea of boundaries, it exists, and people have rules and regulations of what is proper where and who is doing whatever it is that's there. It just depends on that kind of thing. So I think Daniel maybe might agree with me that this happens in that way.
Yes, I'm glad you mentioned that. Number one.
Just a note, Daniel, maybe last comment, and then we should really bring this to a close, because we're over our time now.
So the interface of traditional religion and Christianity. In fact, the very first video I wanted to play for you is a choreographic commentary, contestation of the presence of Christian values at that funeral. So the guy, one of the dancers, used the Bible to dance in protest to the absence of certain customary practices due to the Christian influences. So in a way, when we even appropriate the term syncretism, it doesn't have to do what is there. It's about what's not there. Omission is very important to me. That's how I can really understand the word syncretism, although it has been revised so many times since then. But I think we should look at what has been omitted, intentionally or unintentionally. That's what I learned in the field. And they make comments about that too. Yes.
Well, I want to thank everyone so much. Thank you especially to our presenters for very stimulating papers and responses. Thank you to people for questions. And I'll turn it back to Svanibor to end the session and move us forward. Thanks to all.
Thank you.
And thank you, Jeff, also for excellent sharing. Thank you for presenters. Shall we start then just 5 minutes after the scheduled program? Because we are in different time zones. I think this is the best way how to express it, right? Otherwise, we would start, let's say, in 5 minutes, but we will start in 10 minutes from now. Is it okay?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yes, we can start, yeah.
And the title is Migration, Past and Present. We have 3 at Moravian University, Bethlehem, United States, where she teaches courses in the music department, including music history and world music. Her degrees are from Rice University and Stanford University, where she obtained a PhD in musicology. She's particularly interested in the hymn traditions of the Anabaptists, including the older order Amish, the old colony Mennonites, and the Hutterites. In fact, her paper is the importance of the 16th century radical Reformation hymns for today's old order Amish and Hutterites. So please, Hilde, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. In the interest of time, first, thank you to the organizers. This is a wonderful event. I've been enjoying it. I'm going to share my screen. And if it's okay, I'll just go ahead and start in. I'm hoping that you can see the slideshow. Oh, wait. Sorry, I'm going to have to stop.
Yes, perfect.
Yeah, but I know, I have to optimize for sound. Sorry. There we go. Okay, perfect. All right, so greetings from Bethlehem, Pennsylvania. And yes, this is a picture of 2 old order Amish buggies heading towards their 1-room schoolhouse, ahead on the right, and it's near where I live. My paper focuses on the shared martyr hymns that the Hutterites and the old order Amish sing, read, and study. Most of you are familiar with the story of the Reformation, beginning with Jan Hus in Prague, who sang hymns as the flames took his life in 1415, and continued 100 years later with Martin Luther in the early 16th century. In addition, there were several groups associated with the Radical Reformation, largely recognized as the religious innovators who were not Lutherans or Calvinists. Most were Anabaptists with a shared belief in adult baptism. Today, I am focused on 2 related Anabaptist groups, the Hutterites and the Old Order Amish. Both groups are pacifists, and they also wanted control of schooling for their children. Because of persecutions and conscription laws, they left Europe in the 17th century. Currently, the Old Order Amish and Hutterites live in communities in America, both in the United States and Canada. In their homes, you will find a Bible, Martyr's Mirror, and a hymnal. Martyr's Mirror was published in the 17th century. The first part gives accounts of the martyrs since the time of Christ to 1500, and the second part focuses on the Anabaptist martyrs. The Hutterites also keep copies of their sermons from the 16th century, and to this day, they read those sermons that have been passed down over the centuries in an annual cycle. The Hutterites have been recognized since 1529, and they are named after Jakob Hutter in 1533, when the group was reestablished and embraced again the idea of living communally. They followed the guidance of Acts 2:44, quote, "And all that believed were together and had all things in common." They first migrated to Russia in the 18th century, and then when military service became obligatory, they moved to the United States in the 19th century. During World War I, they again experienced problems with military conscription in the United States, and the Hutterite colonies moved to Canada. Eventually, some colonies returned to the United States, where they currently live in the Dakotas. There are approximately 400 colonies with 450,000 members. Each colony is self-sufficient with everything held in common. The community eats its meals together and provides a schoolhouse for the children. They speak in a German dialect, but their hymns and sermons are in German. There is no private ownership, although families often may keep handwritten copies of the hymns and pass them down to their children. The hymnal for the Hutterites is organized chronologically with the oldest hymns first. The hymn book was printed in 1914, but it was based on 3 earlier collections from the 1600s. However, there are many other collections, including some that have been copied and passed down in families over generations. While the families have tunes assigned to them, they are also read. The Amish have been recognized as a sect since they broke off from the Mennonite Anabaptists under the leadership of Jacob Ammann in 1693. In the 19th century, they further divided into the Old Order Amish and the Amish Mennonites, and since then there have been further divisions. The Old Order Amish are known for their horse and buggy culture, slow adaptation of modern technology, and focus on church and family. Their children go to a one-room schoolhouse and are finished with grade 8. They speak a German dialect, Pennsylvania Dutch, but their hymns again are in German, and German is studied in the school. While the community supports a schoolhouse, church meetings are held in the homes on a rotating basis, with each service accommodating 150 or more people. The most well-known Amish hymn is the Loblied, a song praising God. It is the second hymn sung at every church service and found in their hymn book, the Ausbund. In this example, you can hear the song leader start the hymn, followed by the congregation. The hymns have been transmitted orally since the 16th century, and it is difficult to pick out the original tune it would have been based on. For all of these 16th century hymns, including the hymns sung by the Hutterites and Old Colony Mennonites, the tune is listed at the beginning of the hymn. So in this case, the tune is Aus tiefer Not. I don't think you would recognize the tune. While it's good to have a sense of what hymns sounded like when they're sung in the context of the Hutterite and the Old Order Amish communities, it's important to remember that these hymns are also read and studied in the homes. My focus is on the shared hymn texts written by the Anabaptist martyrs of the 16th century, still closely associated with the identity of today's Hutterites and Old Order Amish. The first printed collection of hymns that make up part 2 of the Ausbund was printed in 1564, containing 51 hymns that were written by the Anabaptist prisoners in Passau. Other hymns have been added in successive printings, but the hymnal in current use has been mostly unchanged since 1583. The Hutterites have a tradition of copying the hymn manuscripts for personal use. However, in church services, they use the first printed edition from 1914, edited by Elias Walter. The stories of the martyrs are also compiled in Martyr's Mirror and in the Chronicle of the Hutterite Brethren. In the late 1940s, scholar Friedrich Ziegelschmidt embarked on the ambitious project of creating a new edition of the Hutterite hymnal. The unpublished typescript of the first volume is held at the Mennonite Historical Library at Goshen College. In this remarkable work, Ziegelschmidt combed through several manuscripts that were used for personal study in the colonies, along with over 20 16th and 17th century manuscripts held in the European archives. His first volume contains 416 hymns, compared to only 352 hymns in the 1914 printed edition. The hymns are presented in chronological order, beginning with the first hymn from 1527, Mit Lust so will ich singen, penned by Felix Manz. For each hymn, Ziegelschmidt lists the manuscripts and printed editions where the hymn can be found, including the Ausbund. Ziegelschmidt identifies 29 martyr hymns, along with 21 hymns written in Passau by the prisoners. This table shows the first 10 of 41 hymns that are found in both the Ziegelschmidt unpublished edition and the most recent Ausbund. Many of the shared hymns were those written in Passau. Although these hymns are sung in worship services, they are also read and studied in homes. Likewise, Martyr's Mirror is studied as part of family devotion, and the stories of the martyrs are mentioned in the sermons. In particular, the martyr hymns are an important companion piece to the Martyr's Mirror. Many of the hymns are written by the martyrs themselves in anticipation of their death, providing an insight into their faith and conviction. Nearly all the shared hymns are written in the first person, beginning with a call to God. In many of these cases, the hymns were written and then immediately shared with communities. Despite the fate of the martyrs, who were often tortured and usually burned or drowned to death, there was an overriding sense that God would not forsake them. It is through these hymns that we can hear the calls of faith, songs of praise, and prayers for resilience. Georg Wagner is mentioned in The Martyr's Mirror, and there's also a song describing his trial and death that's found in both collections, the Hutterites and the Amish. But in addition to learning about Georg Wagner's martyrdom from these accounts, we can also hear his own voice in the hymn Dem Vater wollen wir loben, sung to the tune All Those Who Now Suffer Persecution. Georg Wagner clearly expected that he would be martyred, but we have in his own words a proclamation of his faith, and in the first two verses he states the main point. In an injunction to the community of fellow believers, he says, "We will praise God, who gave his son Christ to make atonement for our sin and live in faith." He also notes that it's important to patiently suffer here, following the example of Christ. Verses 3 through 7 here in the English translation are also addressed to this community of fellow believers. In verse 3, he notes, "Then we are the true heirs of Son of heavenly kingdom if we die for Christ." And in verse 5, he notes that for the sake of Christ, we are taken captive everywhere. He reminds his community to stay true to the words Christ speaks and to keep them well. And he also notes that the words strengthen our hearts. He cautions them to live blamelessly here and be not moved, but walk in truth. There is a shift towards the end of the hymn. Verses 8 and 9 are a direct prayer to the Father, imploring him on behalf of the community again to keep us, Lord, in your care. He notes that he and others are chosen and kept captive with pain and suffering, but hope that they will be eventually gathered and led unto the Lamb. In the last two verses, he ends in the first person, speaking personally to the community who will hear, memorize, and sing this hymn. He greets his fellow believers who stand firm in God and do love Christ. He foresees his own death and a final farewell, noting that he will follow Christ's example, who has taught us all this, so that others might follow after. Georg Wagner's own words and his own voice are still resonant with the Hutterites and Old Order Amish who sing, read, and study his hymn, giving depth and personality to his story. While Ziegschmidt's collection includes a hymn about two women, there's only one hymn attributed to a female writer. The hymn Ewige Vater von Himmelreich to the tune In You I've Hoped, Lord is attributed to Ursula Helwigel in the earliest Hutterite sources. Ursula was 17 when she was imprisoned in 1538. She was prepared to be martyred, but she was held for 5 years before her release in 1543. She watched other prisoners be executed, and her mother died in prison. From both the Chronicle and Martyr's Mirror, we learn that she was bound by the ankles to Georg Liebig even as he was tortured. The hymn by Ursula Helwigel differs from Georg Wagner's hymn. Wagner is writing on behalf of the community with the knowledge that his hymn will be shared and transmitted to the others. He often refers to ours, us, we, and in other verses speaks directly to the other believers, addressing them as you. In the first 7 verses, Helwigel uses the pronouns I and me, and she praises to God to guard my heart and mouth, watch over me at all hours, and she's very concerned that she should not be separated from God's love, even through affliction, torture, fear, and distress. In verse 5, she acknowledges that there are many in her situation, but she is not addressing them. In verse 6, she prays that she will not be violated, which may also be a reference to being bound at the ankles to Georg Liebig. There is a departure from the personal prayers in verse 7, where Helwigel expresses her willingness to wait for God, who will arise and free your prisoners. She amplifies this in verse 8 when she refers to the parable from Matthew 25:1-13 about the 5 wise virgins being prepared for the Lord, the bridegroom, to return at an unknown time, having the necessary oil for their lamps. And in verses 9-10, she reflects on her community of believers. She is still addressing God, but now asking on behalf of several, or us. And finally, there's another shift in verse 11, where she again affirms her faith in the power of God, I doubt not, before reassuring other Christians to be comforted in verse 12. She ends, though, in verse 13 with a final commitment to God and his church. The use of the first person, particularly in the first half of this hymn, conveys the depths of feelings and passion of this young woman. The Old Order Amish and Hutterites both live apart from society. The stories of martyrs, both from the hymnals, Martyr's Mirror, and other histories, are well known in the community. Both groups have faced many difficulties in modern times. The Hutterites left the United States in 1913 when some of the young men were tortured and imprisoned for not wearing the United States military uniform for the Great War. 2 of them died, and actually the grave marks them as martyrs at their gravesite. Old Order Amish men were jailed in their fight to keep their children out of high schools and to educate them in the community. Eventually, the Supreme Court ruled in favor of the Amish. In these instances, their hymns and martyr stories remind the believers that they have experienced persecution before and that they should continue to have faith. However, the hymns written by the prisoners and martyrs give us more than these stories. They introduce us to the stories of the martyrs and prisoners themselves. We can literally hear their voices as they pray and sing while imprisoned. And as we study these hymns with their prayers in the first person, we can have a full understanding of the character of the authors and a sense of the strength of their convictions. These hymns, which have remained a central part of the Hutterite and Old Order Amish culture for over 500 years, have helped shape their response to the challenges of the modern world. Thank you. I look forward to questions at the end of the session.
Perfect, perfect. And thank you for being so precise in time. And
I practiced.
me too, yesterday. So we can move directly to the second intervention and then discuss everything at the end of the session. So next presenter is Razia Sultanova. She is a musicologist and cultural anthropologist. She studied and consequently taught at Tashkent and Moscow State Conservatories. And having moved to the UK in 1994, she has been working at the Universities of London and Cambridge. She is the author of 4 books and 5 edited volumes on Central Asian and Middle Eastern music and gender, and Islam and music. She is the chair of the ICTM study group on global history of music. Her presentation today will be about No Home, No Flag, Mum, music and religious practices of post-Soviet migration. So please rise, Razia, the floor is yours now.
Thank you very much. I wasn't sure I will find the place with the stable internet connection. That's why I pre-recorded my speech. Svanibor, can we move to the pre-recorded version, please?
Yes, Moitza, yeah.
Yes, I'm sharing it.
Thank you very much.
Okay, it starts.
Good afternoon, dear colleagues and dear friends. It's a great privilege and pleasure to participate at your symposium.
And the volume is not very good. I don't know if you can.
I'm sorry, I cannot make it louder.
Aha.
Because it was recorded like this.
Maybe okay. I can do it.
I cannot stop anymore. Okay. Again.
Sorry.
We can concentrate and be very careful about the sound. I think it will work.
Now? Why is it not playing?
Good afternoon, dear colleagues and dear friends. It's a great privilege and pleasure to participate at your symposium, Music, Religion and Spirituality. And the title of my presentation is No Home, No Flag, Mom, Music and Religious Practices of Post-Soviet Migration. Due to the time limit, I would like to concentrate on a particular case of Central Asian migrant who came to Russia in search for a job. And I'm sorry, Svanibor, shall I just try to go to the live performance?
If you prefer, Razia, that would be fine, yes.
No, I'm just trying to help, you know, because with such low volume, I didn't expect it to be corrupted, you know, while I sent from one country to another. So shall we try to do, how shall I do it? Here is my
Is it okay with
master.
You just speak and then we can just watch the video, I guess, yeah? Without sound.
Oh, you would like me to start again with the
If it is okay with you. Yeah.
Or you continue your.
Yeah.
If you can share your screen and show the PowerPoint, is perfect. Otherwise, Moitza can show the PowerPoint without voice, and you can talk about all over it.
If you turn up the volume on your speakers, you can hear Razia, everybody individually.
All right. If you're all right, let's carry on.
Is everybody all right with that? Can everybody hear if you turn up the volume on your speakers? You have speakers?
We have to decide now because every time I stop it, it goes from the beginning. So we are wasting time. I will start it again.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. Ah.
I can't hear anything. Shall we start from share screen? I'm sorry, shall we start from the share screen?
Yes, please. So maybe you can also maybe shorten some.
Yes. Let me see. Did you switch yours? Russia, where all Central Asian migrants
hear now?
spread.
Yes, now yes.
And this is a textbook image of Moscow, which we used to see in our school books from childhood times. The large migrant labor workforce coming from Central Asia and the Caucasus to Russia brought new sounds and new image of Muslim culture. Investigating the influence of the new migrant labor on music culture, my aim is to question the religious and entertaining style of contemporary music scene in Russia cities and in particular in Moscow, where is home for the labor workers people. Migration is currently a prominent global issue, with recent political trends bringing it to the fore of numerous domestic political agendas worldwide. According to authoritative sources, in 2020, there were an estimated 272 million immigrants in the world. World history of mankind presents to our attention numerous examples of mass migration of people, especially after the fall of empires. A similar process is taking place today in the territory of the former USSR. Labor migrants from the republics of the former Soviet Union travel great distances to reach remote Russian cities in search of new jobs. How do these migrant communities survive? Central Asia is a native home of rich Islamic culture, where 4 different Sufi orders were born: Naqshbandiya, Yasaviya, Mavlaviya, and Kubraviya. For centuries, Central Asia was crisscrossed from east to west by caravans and merchants. Today, in the 21st century, Central Asia itself is on the move due to political and economic processes, with up to 15-16 million migrant workers moved all over Russia within the borders of the ex-Soviet Union. These days, one of the most significant places for the development of the migrant phenomenon is the metropolis, meaning a large city or urban area which exists as the significant economic, political, and cultural center of a country or a region. A typical example is one of the most populous and largest cities in Europe, Moscow. According to the Office for National Statistics, today Moscow has a population of nearly 13 million, with 150 languages spoken there. Moscow has also the highest proportion of manual workers in any European cities today. Indeed, the presence of Central Asian migrants in Moscow is enormous. They can be seen from the first minutes of arrival at the airport, from the inside of cars, from hotel windows, as taxi drivers, sales assistants, builders, in banks and other official organizations, as cleaners, and on the streets as janitors. Such a visible public presence shows that the phenomenon has been allowed on different levels and established by the present government through discussions and agreement to accept certain policies and rules. The following statistic helps to explain the proportion of Muslim versus Russian Muscovites. Of the 95 nationalities living in Moscow, 47 ethnic groups are Muslim. Although these figures cover only officially registered migrants, it shows a general increasing trend of Muslim ethnic and religious correlations. After the collapse of the USSR and crisis of uncertainty and transformation, Moscow and St. Petersburg have become the biggest Muslim cities in Europe today. Muslim migrants, workers from the former USSR, have moved there in droves from Uzbekistan, Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan, and distant outposts of the Russian Federation, such as Stavropol or Pyatigorsk. The new migrant population, consisting of up to 2 million people in Moscow, has resulted in an abundance of Uzbek, Kyrgyz, and Caucasian cafeteria and restaurants with live music performances on the streets, in bazaars, and in private theaters and concert halls. Islamic communal prayers on holidays such as Qurban Haid or the Azan have contributed to a completely new image and soundscape incorporating Muslim migrant temporality. The recurring importance of Friday Salat prayers or the visual and auditory presence of the holy month of Ramadan make it clear that the changing demographic has influenced the cultural variety of Moscow to something more akin to Istanbul. Pop culture has reflected the progression from an initial rejection and xenophobic violence toward migrant communities immediately after the collapse of the USSR to the growing public acceptance of Islam, visible in the appearance of new pop groups with names such as Fainting of the Imam or with Central Asian and Caucasian performers winning the Russian TV talent show The Voice. The recent public celebration of Nowruz, a pre-Islamic New Year, in the Russian Oriental Museum, Moscow, further demonstrates a recent willingness to accept the changing social, cultural, and demographic landscape once marked by a history of nationalist racist violence that immediately followed the collapse of the USSR in 1991. Now, after 30 years of the independence of Central Asian states, the labor migrant conditions have been completely changed. Here, as we can see, a public celebration of Nowruz in the Russian Oriental Museum. Nowruz, a pre-Islamic New Year. Here you can see how Central Asian labor workers praying on Moscow streets, blocking all roads, for transport and public movement. You can see it in another street. Although religion have always been present in Moscow and Russia in conventional form, these days Moscow has been showing a particular tolerance towards various beliefs. As Russian scholars argue, it was the two largest world religions, Christianity and Islam, that were dominant at all levels, that become the leading subjects of Russian history. Prayer rugs cover the streets of Moscow during Muslim festivities with a police presence ensuring cultural tolerance, a vision congruent with the new administrative stance towards Islam. 4 official mosques and at least 40 underground mosques based in private apartments represent the growing size of the Muslim population in Moscow, as it was pointed out in the recent opening of the reconstructed Moscow Cathedral Mosque. I quote, "Traditional Islam today is an inherent part of our country's spiritual life," end of quotation. Today, with mass migration come to Moscow, they feel strongly nostalgic, yet also feel respect and gratitude to the current Russian authorities to tolerate the large-scale arrival of new migrant communities. The media has also defended laborers who were being offered some protection in support by the Russian Federation service. You can see here how Muslims perform 8 El-Fitr prayers at Moscow Central Mosque as Russian police took security measures around them. And here is another view. And here is again. They're praying all around the Moscow Cathedral Mosque. That mosque undergone complete reconstructions. The size of the complex has been increased 20 times, and it's now more than 90,000 square meters, which enable it to hold at least 10,000 worshippers at once. The sounds of Islam, whether it's the azan or Central Asian music recordings in cafeteria, are heard throughout Moscow. The azan is performed not only within the mosque, but also outside on the streets. Every Friday prayer, Juma namaz, and prayers for festive services are guided by muezzin live performance of the azan. The most powerful azan sounds inside of the Moscow Cathedral Mosque, which is the largest and tallest mosque in Russia and in Europe. The Moscow Cathedral Mosque, near the Metro Prospect Mira, is often described as splendidly beautiful and deeply impressive. It attracts visitors from Russia, Central Asia, and the Caucasus who come to see and to pray in it. I myself had the privilege of experiencing the Moscow Cathedral Mosque resounding acoustic when I visited the mosque on the first day of Ramadan. The sound of 10,000 voices simultaneously announcing Allahu Akbar, God is the greatest, was truly a powerful sound with a distinctly moving quality. This is the beautiful mosque. So now you can ask me, what about music? The popular group in Moscow that regularly appears on television and corporate shows is a Russian Uzbek ethno-folk band with the paradoxical name Obmorok Mama, a name that officially sounds like fainting of their mom. The group consists of leader singer Ikhtiar Kadyrov, drum, Doira the frame drum, Jurabek Abdullayev plucked lutar, and Alexei Barakov accordion, which is particularly popular in the western part of Uzbekistan. The band, formed with labor migrants in 2004, became famous within a few weeks, performing in Moscow, St. Petersburg, and other nearby cities with their instant hit. I cannot remember when I moved to this land. I might have been drunk. When a cop stops me saying, "You don't have a work permit," I answer with, "Hang on, my address today is..." This song mocks the Soviet-wide hit "My Address is the Soviet Union," which is used to be a rock anthem symbolizing the friendship of all Soviet people in 1970s, 1980s. The song was composed by David Dukhmanov, lyrics by Vladimir Kharitonov, and was satirically re-recorded in 2002 by Sergei Shnurov, the leader of the Leningrad group. In 2004, the song was performed by Obmorok Mama, making it instant hit again by representing a feeling of the humiliated diaspora. In addition to comical song, this is the memorable national efforts of the Soviet Union. The group is famous for its remake of Katyusha and other Russian pop and rock songs. The reaction of listeners to the comical remake of Russian folk songs performed in the Uzbek style is so widely perceived as delighted that the group now performs everywhere, including anniversaries and wedding celebrations with a distinctive style that includes wearing Uzbek national costumes, playing traditional Uzbek instruments, singing in Russian with a strong Uzbek accent, and using traditional Uzbek microtones with rich melismatic voice embellishment like in Makam. The performers have gained wide recognition amongst listeners.
Когда переехал, не помню, наверное, был я бухой. Мой адрес не дом и не улица, мой адрес сегодня такой. Мой адрес не дом и не улица, мой адрес сегодня такой. В Ленинград sp.ru В Ленинград sp.ru Когда тормозит меня мусор, прописка молит никакой, то я отвечаю спокойно, мой адрес сегодня такой. То я отвечаю спокойно, мой адрес сегодня такой. В Ленинграде sp.ru
Let's press the next slide, please. Thank you. I'm going to play for you just very short example, but it didn't work, sorry. Okay, the Tajik group Akin Opera. A show that's currently popular in Moscow is a chanted theatrical narrative called the Akin Opera, composed by Tajik migrants Pakiza Kurbanassenova, Ajam Chukabayev, and Abdulbamad Bekmamatov, who perform using voice, a long-necked lute tar and frame drum doira, respectively. During the week, the actors are busy working. One is a cleaner in the tax administration office, another an assistant painter, and the last a bank teller. But on the weekends, they're engaged with music and the art. Through the medium of music and song, Akin Opera tells of their migrant lives in Moscow. The show takes place on the stage of the new Teatr Dog. Central Asian Janitor Scoop Major Russian Theatre Award, screamed the headlines when the Akin Opera actors received a special award at Russia's most prestigious theatre festival, the Golden Mask, held at Moscow Bolshoi Theatre. Most of the performances in theatre are staged in the genre of documentary theatre based on authentic text, interviews, and the fates of real people, very often migrant workers. This is a special genre that exists as the intersection of art and topical social analysis. They just produced recently CD where Pakiza is singing, but here is the group itself. So, some Islamic religious rituals like mavluds, run by religious performers from Central Asia, are performed in Moscow inside of rented halls or community centers to mark family celebrations, birthdays, or weddings. So it looks like all those Muslim ethnicities and nations, Uzbek, Kyrgyz, Tajik, Azerbaijani, Chechen, Dagestanis, etc., coming from different religious Islamic groups representing Sunni, Shia, or Sufi-related developments. Here in Russia, in Moscow, they're becoming all united by the common feelings of homesickness. Gathering in the Moscow Cathedral Mosque, they prayed together, forgetting their differences, becoming one tribe, one army, one camp, the Muslim migrant workers of the former USSR. They grew up through their childhood stories told by their parents' time of the USSR people as the United Nation or the country of the great friendship of all USSR people, etc. But today, they're all the lost generation of young people living in the post-colonial time. As the Ukrainian group Pyatnitsa manifest in their recent song the feelings of their lost generation, singing "No home, no flag, mom." They use music performance to herald their present bitter feelings of the lost expectation, the lost paradise. Today, for millions of labor workers of post-Soviet republics, coming to work in Russia, isn't Islam a life-saving factor for displaced people in the displaced space of their existence, helping a whole generation of today's migrants to forget the feeling of despair and homesickness for the former common country? Is it religion which helps them to survive? Thanks for your attention.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. I'm sorry, there were some technical things, but Moja did so well. Thank you so much, dear Mojka. Yes.
Thank you, Razia, for your wonderful paper. Thank you, Moitza, for your help. And I have to move directly to the last presenter because we lost several minutes. So the last one is, last but not least, as we say, is Maša Marty. She earned her degree in music education and ethnodoxology and cultural anthropology from the University of Ljubljana, where she currently pursues her doctoral studies in ethnomusicology. She's interested in musical practices related to identity and space, in new musical phenomena in various cultural environments, and in music of different ethnic groups and related minority issues. Her current research focuses on the context of musical events in migrant milieus of emigrants from Slovenia in Switzerland, where she lives. In fact, her presentation, the title is Liturgical, Singing of the Slovenian Catholic Community in Switzerland and in the Principality of Liechtenstein. Please, Maša, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Fulvia. So hello, everyone. And I just like to share my... Is it?
Yes.
Yeah, okay, thank you. Good. So hello, everyone. Thank you for having me. And yeah, now I would like to present my paper, which is based on ethnographic research among the Slovenian Catholic community in Switzerland and Principality of Liechtenstein. So the Slovenian Catholic community has been formed since the late 1960s. At that time, economic migrants came from the former common state of Yugoslavia to the then richer and industrially developing Switzerland. Religions were different within the Yugoslavia republics, but otherwise Yugoslavia was at that time in accordance with the doctrine of socialist, communist, one-party state, intolerant of religious life and the existence of the church, which pushed it to the margins of social life in Yugoslavia. However, until the middle of the 20th century, Slovenian society was predominantly Catholic traditional, and those who moved to Switzerland wanted also to continue to practice the Christian faith in their culture and, if possible, in their language. Also, due to a lack of knowledge of the regional language, that's mean like German, French, or Italian, and so they were not really able then to. So many of them they were not able to actively participate in the religious services of the country to which they moved. In 1968, the Slovenian Catholic mission was established, And this was also that time after the Second Vatican Council, which defined migration and religious life in the Pastorali Migratorium Cura. And they gave also the instructions on the pastoral care of people who migrate. You can see it here, this document, it's like part of it is on the left side. On the right side, it's Migratio. This is organization here in Switzerland, and they takes care of the Catholic missions of immigrant churches in Switzerland. And down there are two pictures of these immigrants just to illustrate that when they came at the late 60s. The mission actually expanded rapidly, and in 1974, for example, it already had more than 3,000 family and individual addresses. And within this year, several priests and one nun also work within the Slovene Catholic mission. The mission began a very active life. In addition to pastoral work, they took also care of rich cultural and musical events. For several years, they were also like a folklore group. It was a choir for 1 or 2 years and so on. And every year, the Slovenian Catholic Mission has organized and continues to do so the All Slovenia Pilgrimage to Einsiedeln, which is still the largest event today for Slovenian people in Switzerland and Liechtenstein. And this is like downstairs, you can see the picture of this. They're coming up to 500 people, also from Slovenia and so on, so from France, sometimes some individuals and so on. So at the beginning, so for this generation of Slovenia who came to work temporarily in Switzerland, the church provided constant and reliable support in a new and unknown world. People enter then in a world with a new language, with a new culture, with new rules and regulations, and had to conquer new social, cultural codes, build new connection, new survival strategies in this new country. So the Slovenian Catholic Mission offered them an already familiar world, some kind of shelter, understanding within the community. It offered them also a feeling of home country in a new country. And these new immigrants from Slovenia also appreciated that they were able to publicly demonstrate their religious affiliation without hesitation, and even more, their affiliation with the Catholic faith also served as an easier way for them to be accepted in the new environment in the host country. At the time, almost half of the population in Switzerland was of the Roman Catholic faith. I can see it on the left side. How it's today? Today, it's still the largest group in Switzerland is Roman Catholic, which today represent 37% of population. It's also on the right side picture. But so many Catholics is also at the expense of migration. The Slovenian Catholic Mission has been led by Pastor David Taljat since 2003. Oh, I can go. It's here. He is an active musician, composer, music producer, sound engineer. He also has a sound studio, is engaged in publishing, in music publishing. And for the last 2 years, he has been intensively involved in photography. So he's not, this year is not so much in music. Anyway, he has released several CDs and has published several videos with his own original Christian popular music. He posted them on the YouTube channel with the idea that through this new media and Christian pop, the gospel message would reach a wider audience. I made a few pictures of his YouTube videos that everybody can see them on the YouTube. His main task is, of course, pastoral work with Slovenians in Switzerland. The priest gives masses in 12 places across Switzerland and Liechtenstein, or just one in Liechtenstein. And today only around 150 people regularly attend Slovenian religious services, most of them from the first community, which was founded in the late 60s, or the people that came up to 1980s. Sometimes also some young individuals that would come, or some young families. I myself visited most of the community in years between 2014 and 16. Then I conducted some semi-formal interviews with church members. In 2015, also I interviewed the previous leader of the Slovenian church, who then lived after 2003 in Slovenia. He was retired. But most information and conversation I had with the current leader, so with the pastor David Taljat. And at the same time, also I attended religious services several times, and I attended also pilgrimage twice. In my work, I proceeded from the idea that music in various interpretative forms remains a central element in religious conversion. Music is used as a tool to establish Christian musical spaces, is crucial in preserving Christian community, as well as in the presentational identification of an individual community in a secular environment. It plays a role in establishing relation between Christians, between different ethnic communities, in establishing new communities, and in communication within the community. The sound space in the Christian world connects the whole Christian community, which is divided within it, and creates local musical practices, which are also preserved through regular renewal. Meetings within the church enable the continuation and renewal of ethnic local culture, through which members of the diaspora church connect with the tradition of the place of origin, the place where they themselves have accepted and internalized Christianity. So therefore, I was interested in what is that musical locality that is locally important and useful in building Christian belief, theology, practice, identity in the diasporic Slovenian community in Switzerland. And also, since every renewal of the church begins in worship service, I was interested in what is the right, so-called right form of music that satisfies liturgical needs, complements it, and supports the liturgy. When I was asking the pastor, David Taljat, he replied me, yeah, we sing in church worship services, and that's it, our music. He told me there is no possibility for anything else, and it's good like it is. So today, individual Holy Mass is attended just by from 5 to 30, mostly seniors. Musically and instrumentally, they are not so experienced, and so singing remains the only possibility of musical expression. However, in the Catholic Church, the support for the liturgical rite is important, and the function of singing at the liturgy is to enrich the worship. Singing is also seen as the sign of a heart's joy. Already Apostle Paul actually instructed to sing together. And so Augustine said, singing is for one who loves. So the importance of singing mentions many church documents and provisions throughout the history. Also, for example, the former Pope Benedict XVI, Joseph Ratzinger, wrote in The Spirit of the Liturgy about the importance of the music. And he wrote also that sing is one of the most commonly used words in the Bible. It occurs 309 times in the Old Testament and 36 in the New one. So Pastor David Taljat, who is also a very good singer, encourages the participants of the Slovenian church to get involved in common folk singing as much as possible during the service, thus addressing the community in their cultural identity. The repertoire includes, as he said to me, we sing old songs, nothing special, collected from old songbooks. those who are already known from their home country. So, these are songs that are actually integral part of the canonized liturgical rite, arranged according to the church year in the Roman Catholic Church and according to the structure of the Mass, so of the Holy Mass. The pastor collected the songs in accordance with the prior knowledge of the elder visitors, which means the repertoire they received in their mother tongue at a young age and their abilities, and altogether they sing like a few dozen songs together during the year. There are not so many of them. When I asked him what he thought of maybe including some newer, maybe even modern songs to accompany the liturgy, he told me, you know, we priests are a kind of animators. And he told me that as a leader, he has to take care of the dynamics of religious ceremonies as well as finding real musical support. And he also added, you know, all young and old, all clinging to this folk song book of singing. When you hear the melodies of a song, you connect it with the time. It connects you with the liturgy. One modern song, it doesn't connect you. It has a profane note, and these old songs, they have a much, much bigger future than any other. We just grew up with them. So he backed also with the words, yes, this is something that we really need. And the repertoire was also discussed again and again in the history of the Catholic Church, and this, not including like something also new or newer songs, is also in line with the guidelines of the Roman Catholic Church today, such as the former Pope Benedict XVI disputed the suitability of popular modern music in the liturgy, and this, not that it's not good, was also expressed at the Rome Conference in 2017. The title of the conference was Music and Church, Cult and Culture, 50 years after the Musicam Sacram. So they also expressed this questionability of the involvement of profane music for liturgical purposes. So the repertoire of the Slovene diaspora church in Switzerland has not been renewed for decades, but also membership actually has hardly been renewed in recent years. As I mentioned, most of the visitors are 70 plus who have passed on the faith to their children. These children are today middle-aged, but these children, they do go to the church, they join a Swiss local church. They just did not adapt this, like they're not going to the Slovenian church anymore. And but however, although they are relatively small group of this of this Catholic Church, it still means that largest group of Slovenians who meet physically on a weekly or monthly basis. Only the ritual group through social network is more active, but this works quite differently. So for these older believers, church songs always evoke cultural memory and have a deep spiritual significance for members of the Slovene Catholic community. By participating and singing these old Slovenian songs, they experience their full humanity at holy masses. They nurture and confirm their values, perception of the world. Church songs that accompany masses are for them a tool for achieving religious truth and awareness of the right way how to live, or of how to live in this world. And I would finish here. I hope I am in time. Oh, thank you. Grazie.
Thank you, Maša, for this wonderful paper, and thank you to all the three presenters for their incredible papers. And I think so different for space and age, but they have several elements in common that are memory, how music builds spaces, specific spaces, special places for living their own identity. So thank you very much. Very, very, very interesting. So the floor is open for questions. I don't want to to steal space for the others. So I don't see on YouTube any question at the moment in the chat, and not even in the chat, but maybe someone want. Razia, I see you. Okay. But your microphone is off, so you have to. Okay.
My question is going to Hilde. Thank you very much for a very interesting presentation. You were talking about Anabaptists, saying that at the 18th century, some of them moved to Russia.
Yes, they did. Yeah. So they moved from Germany to Russia, and they were these were actually at this point that they were Mennonites who moved there. Yeah.
If there are any now, I mean, the 21st century.
No. They all left because again, because of conscription, and so they were forced to leave from Russia as well. Yeah. So the largest group that went through Russia were the Old Colony Mennonites, and they've now ended up in. There's still some in Canada, but then they also moved to Mexico. So they went from Europe, I mean, and then Russia, the steppes of Russia, then down. One of the fun things about the 18th century is that they used a special notation, which was cipher notation, where the music was written with numbers as opposed to notation that we have there. They had huge singing choir. The ones that sang, there were some of them who actually had singing choirs in Russia, where they actually sang even things like the Alleluia Chorus using numbers, this cipher notation. So, but yeah, they were in Russia. Thank you.
It's very interesting. Thank you very much.
So we have two questions, but from Yaksha Primorac. Maša wanted to ask something. I don't know. Who wants to go first?
Yeah, actually, it was just like, I just wanted to ask about, are they still any in Europe, or do you have any information of
the older Amish are not in Europe, no, and nor are the Hutterites. They're all in those two groups particularly are in Canada and the United States.
Mm-hmm.
They sometimes visit. They go on like sort of heritage tours and things like that. But it's pretty rare, especially since they don't really do much with airplane travel, particularly for the older Amish. But they've been known to go to Europe just for heritage tours. But no, they no longer have.
So можешь мне затворить, пожалуйста?
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Yaksha, won't you give you the question to Hilde yourself? Pose the question. We don't hear you. So I do it for you.
Okay. Do you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. You can read, or it's the same.
Yes, for Hilde, he was wondering if you can present some basic information about non-spiritual singing of youth Hutterites. I read that they are allowed to sing some love songs with the accompaniment of guitars.
Yeah, so it depends on each district. For the Hutterites have different rules. So you'll find out that so each colony, district in the older Amish colony in the Hutterites, and they have different rules for singing. In the most conservative older Amish, you would not have any accompaniment from guitars, but they absolutely, all the youth do sing hymns. And they have, like if you go to the Hutterite colony, the young people will get together and sing hymns, and they all, in those particular groups, they have some choirs. They're singing in 4-part harmony with the director, and they're performing, and it's part of in both cases, it's really important for courtship. So in the older Amish, they go together and they sing at night, and at the night of a church meeting. So if it's a Sunday evening, they have a gathering for the young people. It's called a gang. Anyway, they gather and they sit at a really long table, and the boys and girls sit on the opposite sides from each other. And then it's interesting because it's totally observed by the adults, because the adults will sit on a ring outside of them, and they sing hymns together. And they can sing hymns in both German and English. They're not singing these old traditional hymns. They're singing metered hymns that are in English. They also, and then after that, then the girls will go home, be taken home in a buggy by one of the young men. So that's the courtship for them. In the Hutterite colonies, it's a little bit different, because there they can have Occasionally they can have guitar accompaniment, for example. In some places they might even have keyboards, pianos, but it depends on the colony. I went to one of the colonies and they did some research on me on the internet, and they said, oh, you know, before I came, his name is Elmer. He calls me up the day before I'm about to drive out. He says, a friend of mine in town said you play the fiddle. And I said, yeah. And he says, well, what kind of music do you play on that fiddle? And I said, well, folk music. And he said, well, do you play any hymns? And I said, absolutely. So he said, well, are you going to bring it? And I said, yes. So I brought the fiddle. The young people sang for me. I played my fiddle for them. And they loved it. But the next day I went to visit the bishop, and he says, don't mention the fiddle. Now everybody in the community knew I played the fiddle there, but the bishop who was visiting from another colony, don't mention it. So they don't have the instruments there. But then in the Canadian side, which was the very next day I visited a different colony, and they did have, actually I saw a piano there, and they did actually have a choir. So it varies depending on the rules. So but in the colonies, those choirs, if they go to visit other colonies, that's where, again, you have courtship involved, right? Because you're now meeting somebody from a nearby colony, and typically the girls move and they go and join when they marry, they join the colony of their husband.
Wow.
Okay.
Wow. So it's just another world of the old hymns and hymnals and so on, yeah?
Yeah. They use a lot.
I'm sorry, I have to interrupt because time is running, and there is a question for Razia also from Yaksha. So Yaksha, you have to respect your own questions. So I don't know if Razia already read it.
Already, thank you very much. It's a very good question, because for Jumana Mass, for the Friday prayer, if they have no time, to get to the main mosque, which is always overwhelmed, they pray on the streets. I showed
also, yeah.
They're still praying on the streets.
And what about police?
Police have to protect them because there is something. But it's only now, 30 years later, it didn't happen at the beginning when the Soviet Union collapsed 30 years ago. But now police have to, accept those rules. And it's interesting. I was in Moscow during the Ramadan, for example, on radio and television, they all put notes for drivers saying, please avoid this street and this, pattern because they are going to pray on the streets. At least it's announced publicly and it's accepted.
And in Ramadan, is it only on Fridays or every evening on Tarawih namazes?
No, the beginning of Ramadan, for example. When the end of Ramadan, when everyone's supposed to be involved, at least they have publicly announces, that be careful, this street may be blocked, by the police because, migrant communities will be praying there and so on, which is very good. It's some kind of the innovation, which is very kind. Yes, and
because I know that they are protected for 2 Bayrams, 2 Eids. They are very protected, but I didn't know about these Juma namazes and so on. Yeah.
Yes, they have
conversation is very interesting, and I think also Mojca could add something about linking it with her experience in Slovenia. But unfortunately, our time is really run out. So I have to stop, and I hope that we will have other occasions to talk about all these issues. Also language is another issues that emerged from all the 3 papers. For example, which language is chosen for prayer and linked with memory, identity, and everything. So I really thank you all 3 presenters, because you gave us a lot of not arguments, that's Italian, a lot of elements to think about in music and religion connections. And I give back to Svanibor the floor because we are really too late.
Thank you so much. If you want to read, there is also one message by Marcia over there that you can find. But When shall we continue? We are now 15 minutes behind the schedule. Shall we start then in 15 minutes, or is it too much?
Please. Yes, please. Would be
Yes?
nice. In 15
So you
minutes.
can
Yes.
have some time to eat and drink and stretch a little bit. Yes. So we start then in 15 minutes from now. Okay?
Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. See you soon.
Okay.
Good evening, dear colleagues and friends. We are very pleased to be all together at the conference, which was Music, Religion, Spirituality Symposium, running by Svanibor Patton. Thank you, Svanibor, for organizing it. And thank you to your lovely team. They've been really helpful. Thank you very much. So our small panel will have two different presenters. First is Marcin Staszewski. And please, Marcia, welcome. But let me introduce you in 2 words and 2 sentences. Marcia is an ethnomusicologist and associate professor at Cape Breton University, Sydney, Nova Scotia, as well as founding director at the Centre for Sound Communities and Art-Led Social Innovation Lab. She is president of the Canadian Society for Traditional Music, member of the executive board of the ACTM, serves on the Society for Ethnomusicology Council, and is adjunct professor of music at the University of Alberta. In her work, she challenges racism, colonialism, and systematic inequities. I would like just to add that Marcia is also a winner of the ICTM article prizes. Congratulations, Marcia.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Yes.
And that's a prize that was for our collaborative authors. So it's not me alone, but I really appreciate. Thank you.
Yes.
May I begin?
Please, yes, it's your. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Razia, for the lovely introduction. Greetings, colleagues. Many thanks to Svanibor Patton, our esteemed ICTM president and wonderful mentor to many of us, and to all organizers of this event for their efforts through challenging times to bring us all together. I'm very grateful to be able to connect with you. I join you from Unama'ki, also known as Cape Breton Island in Mi'kma'ki, the ancestral and unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq people. This territory is covered by the Treaties of Peace and Friendship, which Mi'kmaq and Wolastoqiyik, or Maliseet and Passamaquoddy people, first signed with the British Crown in 1726. The treaties did not deal with surrender of lands and resources. It in fact recognized Mi'kmaq and Wolastoqiyik title and established rules for what was to be an ongoing relationship between nations living alongside one another. And in the interest of keeping to this 15 minutes, I'm going to read the very formal paper that I have written and try to contain my penchant to speak extemporaneously. So forgive me if it's very formal, but I want to be respectful of time. Oops, and now I'm having, there we go. Okay. Since the last decade of 1800s, when Ukrainians began immigrating to Canada in large numbers, 170,000 before World War I alone, their religious practices have undergone transformation as churches have incorporated local musics and languages and responded to regional, national, and transnational political pressures. Today I will focus on aspects of a cantor-led liturgical chant singing practice called samoyilka, including language, gender, and new modes of transmission, which involve also adaptations during the COVID-19 pandemic. I draw on autoethnographic data from my experiences growing up in Ukrainian prairie churches and as a practicing cantor in Sydney, Cape Breton, Nova Scotia, now on Canada's eastern Atlantic shores, in which I've been guided by parish priest Father Roman Dusanovsky, a co-researcher and my teacher, and who was once an instructor of liturgical musics for those studying to be priests. I also draw on interviews with dozens of other cantors, clergy, and community practitioners across Canada and the United States. Placing musicians and music making at the center of examinations of history and culture, I write about processes involved in the creation and transformations of musical and religious practices, and of categories of identity such as ethnicity. I focus on the practice of singing as part of the continual transformation and recreation of community and musical practice, shedding light on the vitality and adaptability of this congregational music and the people who practice it. This approach attends to ways in which these musics are practiced differently than they are represented in prevalent narratives, norms, and descriptions of tradition. The large numbers of people of Ukrainian origins who began to migrate to Canada in the early 1890s were part of a broader influx of immigrants from various European regions, enticed by the government of Canada to develop agriculture. These early immigrants often experienced overt ethnically based discrimination, prejudice, and racism. Thousands of Ukrainians were even interned during World War I in labor camps across the whole of Canada. Scholarship on Ukrainian culture in Canada often characterizes immigrant experience by focusing on the pressures and processes of assimilation experienced by Ukrainians in Canada, and that's assimilations in quotation marks taken from the literature. Ukrainian Orthodox and Catholic churches have long been central in preserving the language, culture, and identity of Ukrainian Canadians. The need for preservation of Ukrainian culture in Canada has often been expressed as an antidote to the pressure to assimilate. Other scholars documented concerns expressed by Ukrainians in Canada about the existential threats to the, quote, purity and continuity of Ukrainian language especially, including the, quote, problem of the Anglicization of the lineage and customs due to, again, quote, intermarriage with non-Ukrainians. A desire to preserve cultural practices in new environments is not unique to Ukrainians in Canada, of course, but its importance for many Canadians of Ukrainian ancestry cannot be overstated. For instance, Father Roman reminded me of his mother's clearly stated purpose, having immigrated after World War II, to maintain and preserve all Ukrainian traditions in order to return them to Ukraine once that country was liberated from the Soviets. It is indeed a value of pluralistic societies that people be able to continue traditions, customs, and practices. Though minoritized and sometimes still denigrated, Ukrainian Canadian culture is also prominently recognized across much of Canada as part of our multicultural mosaic. Canadian landscapes have been intertwined with Ukrainian lifestyles and Ukrainian religious practices on the Canadian prairies especially. Quote, if you've driven across the Canadian prairies between Winnipeg and Saskatoon, you will have noticed how ubiquitous are both the grain elevators and the onion-domed Ukrainian churches, end quote. The significance of religion for Ukrainian immigrants to Canada and their descendants has been documented by scholars noting creative ways in which people worked with the resources they had at hand and with clergy and religious institutions to attend to what historian Yarenyuk calls, quote, the longing of their souls, end quote. Folklorist Beaton observed religion has been a major conduit between individuals and their communities in Cape Breton. Specifically, she writes that, quote, in the case of Ukrainians in the industrial urban community of Sydney, Nova Scotia on Cape Breton Island, religion is the operative link in the reciprocity between human action and the socio-political environment, end quote. A discussion of Eastern Christian world or even its manifestations in Canada are well beyond today's presentation, but it's important to acknowledge these complexities as part of the experience of Ukrainian religious practice in Canada. These practices are and have always been fractious, reflecting a diversity of old country histories and experiences and a variety of responses to changing and complex realities in the modern world, despite tendencies to describe ethnocultural identity as monolithic, unified, fixed, or knowable. Whether on Western Canadian prairies or the Atlantic eastern coasts, soundscapes of Byzantine Ukrainian churches in Canada are busy. Leading up to a liturgy, people park their vehicles, close their car doors, and approach the church while greeting one another outside the building. As they enter the narthex or vestibule, they pick up their weekly bulletin and discuss parish activities, the health of family members, and the weather. The din is swiftly replaced with silence or mere whispers as congregants move through the narthex into the nave, the central and principal part of a cruciform church. They find their seats in wooden pews, open their prayer books, and hymns to sing. Outdoor bells or electric carillons may call the congregation to service. Parishioners' attention is drawn to the front of the church as the priest opens the large central doors, the royal doors of the iconostas. To begin the service, the priest incenses around the altar and other church spaces, Parishioners sing a paraliturgical hymn as they settle into their seats for the service, children amongst their parents. To open a concert marking the centennial of our local Ukrainian Catholic Church parish in Sydney a few years ago, Bandurist Julian Katasti and I sang a paraliturgical hymn, appropriate for the celebration of a diaspora community and its cherished religious practice as, quote, both a religious song and the song of a journey, in this case, the journey of the Mother of God to the foot of the cross where her son was crucified, end quote. The first stanza. Ceres pole shirokeje, ta ceres more lebokeje, ta ceres more the painfully evocative experience of the tragic journey of the Mother of God to the foot of the cross is a metaphor that calls to mind the difficult and deeply personal experiences of the many Ukrainian immigrants who made the difficult journey to Canada with the hope of making a better lives for themselves, and even more so for their children. I am a settler in this land. My family came from present-day Ukraine about 100 years ago to the prairies in Canada's western provinces, established farms, contributed to the growth of settler communities. Hundreds of Byzantine Ukrainian churches were built across Canada in the 1900s. My father's father, wanting to give back to the community that welcomed him, donated funds and time in organizational and construction skills and savvy in the building of a Ukrainian Catholic church in the province of Saskatchewan. He, his wife, my grandmother, and children were strong in their faith, having lived through wars, dire economic hardships, and personal ones too, including the deaths of babies, toddlers, and grown children, and immigration itself, which at that time meant parting with one's family, community, and customs forever, except what you could carry with you, what you share with others and nurture and sing together in a new land. These two important teachings highlight the importance of singing Byzantine Ukrainian liturgical responses, indicating the primacy of singing without instruments as sanctioned common practice in Byzantine Ukrainian liturgical practice. As well, celebrated Ukrainian Church hierarch Metropolitan Sheptytsky stated that the very fact of singing prayer adds value to the prayer. In fact, it doubles its value. These statements need to be interrogated for their layers of meaning, and I'm pursuing that elsewhere. But given the import these cultural experts place on singing, it's incumbent upon researchers to engage the practice as part of data collection and analytical process. Something more happens through singing prayer than speaking it. In a fact that may help us understand better the value of singing as cultural practice as part of Ukrainian history, culture, and experience in Canada, whereas language has typically been emphasized in scholarship as the locus of cultural identity and value. My own liturgical chant practice has also helped me to understand deeper layers of knowledge conveyed through the practice of the singing. For example, the capacity of music to activate embodied knowledge. It's relevant in such cases as the singing of memorial services, which might activate memories of deceased loved ones for whom this music is sung and was sung at another time, or of Easter services which use similar music. This level of understanding can help ethnomusicologists learn how music is made in terms of its creative process, not limited to mechanics, as well as how it is made meaningful in the lives of the two practices. Paraliturgical hymns typically begin and end liturgy. Samoylka, chant-based congregational practice at the heart of contemporary liturgical practice in Canada, is the living music of this religion. It's performed in dialogue with a priest who leads a liturgy, a cantor or diak leads the congregation in singing responses. Together, this trinity sings to enact the liturgy, to build and affirm community. This cantor-led congregational responsorial practice is distinct from the singing of composed choral music in liturgies, which is also part of the Ukrainian-Canadian religious practice. Samoylka translates literally as self-expressed music, referring to its improvisatory nature. The improvisation is built on modes that change with the church's calendar and for special occasions, such as memorials and funerals or high holidays. There are multiple regional chant dialects, but where the melodic content comes from, I have not yet been able to ascertain. The diak, traditionally male, is joined by the members of the congregation, anyone who wants to sing. The congregation improvises in 3 or 4-part harmony, which they learn through participating in services throughout their life. The jack is also sometimes supported by a group that may formally be known as a krelos, which is also the word for a cantor's podium, typically containing a cabinet for liturgical books. All of this traditionally is an oral practice, except for some foundational texts a jack might use to support mostly the obscure services. The congregation's practice of speaking liturgical responses is now common in Canada, increasingly since the 1970s. Yet even when responses are in English, as is now common in Ukrainian Catholic churches across Canada, the responses may also be sung. Liturgical languages have also been changed on multiple occasions from Old Church Slavonic to different versions of vernacular Ukrainian, as well as English and French, because Canada is officially bilingual. Some Ukrainians in Canada perceive the change of liturgical language to anything other than Ukrainian as a, quote, corruption, or an anglicization or Canadianization. To ne nasze, literally, that's not ours. They see it as cultural loss, though the use of English translations in this context was intended for adaptability and to support continued vitality of the practice in new social environments. What's more, the use of the local vernacular other than Ukrainian has welcomed non-Ukrainians into Ukrainian parish communities. Father Roman observed this in at least 2 parishes, here in Sydney and also in Val-d'Or, Quebec. The relationship of language and music needs to be further considered here because translated texts don't match up to chant melodies the same way in the original Church Slavonic, vernacular Ukrainian, much less English or French. And while church hierarchy may mandate a particular language or text, it is not uncommon for an older or entirely idiosyncratic version to be used simply because congregants feel, quote, we learned it this way, end quote. This shows that liturgical practice is influenced by the specific local knowledge, experiences, and connections. Whatever the language of liturgy, as Father Roman has noted, it doesn't matter which church you go to if they use Samoilka, you're home. By contrast, if they don't use familiar music that you can sing along with, then you are an audience member, end quote. His statements assert the power of music as an embodied expression of belonging in diaspora and places value in the participation of music through the practice of singing, rather than merely listening to the music as aesthetic form. Relationships, intimacies, and communities are created and maintained in Byzantine Ukrainian congregations across boundaries and borders of homeland and diaspora through the creation of sound and through the collective practice of singing. Although the role of jack or cantor is traditionally male, women are increasingly taking up this role across Canada. Why? Parishioners and priests point to the aging and decreasing number of parishioners in Ukrainian churches tend to live longer and to be more active in parish life too. The need for cantors has outweighed the need to maintain the gender norms of tradition and has introduced new experiences to Byzantine Ukrainian practices in Canada. Women serve as cantors, and this has been widely encouraged by clergy who also began providing informal training for this role since at least the early 2000s on the prairies. Women I have interviewed describe their cantoring practice as strongly mutual, communal, and participatory. In Sydney, the women with whom I sing speak of their interest in singing as a means of creating community with one another. They value singing also as a means to continue their Ukrainian culture. Still, women cantors I have met have been reticent to refer to ourselves as jack, perhaps because it is a masculine gendered noun, and also it reminds us then of the transgression of norms, or perhaps because it signals a special role for a solitary person, whereas women especially value the communal aspect of the practice. What's more, through research, I've learned that women cantors are frequently part of early 20th century parish histories across Canada. This suggests that while traditional aspects of various musical practices may even be prevalent in conventional descriptions of the practice, variants of that practice may be much more common than previously thought. In this way, studies of diaspora liturgical music may highlight the importance of nonconformist aspects of the practice as it is conventionally described. Other factors have spurred yet other innovations in Byzantine Ukrainian liturgical this presentation. I only have time here to mention briefly that, as with many practices during COVID, liturgies migrated online. So did sessions in which singers were grateful for opportunities to connect with and sing with one another from places across North America, like this one that we hosted at the Center for Sound Communities, led by Dr. Melanie Turgeon, who has also compiled a volume of Samoyilka in which she, in consultation with priests and cantors, of whom she is one, has set English translations to familiar chant melodies on musical scores. Churches like the one my grandfather contributed to in Saskatchewan were the foundations of life, offering solace and comfort, time for contemplation, celebrations at joyous times, and community. These practices shaped my world, from Christmases and caroling, catechism classes, and summer church camp, to baptisms, weddings, and funerals. I learned as a child to sing memorial tones and to grieve my grandfather at the age of 9, and when it came time, I was able to sing to grieve the death of my mother. I may not believe in church dogma, but I understand the vital nature of the practices and community, so I have an appreciation of what they meant for my ancestors. I also know that these musics, the religion, spiritual practices, they are all tied up with oppression and colonialism in this part of the world, especially related to Indigenous people. You may have seen stories in the news about the discoveries across Canada of thousands of Indigenous children's graves, unmarked, on properties of what were once residential schools, many run by the Catholic Church. After centuries of oppression, through Canada's Truth and Reconciliation Commission and other initiatives, institutions, communities, and individuals like me are trying to reckon with our nation's terrible past and to work toward reconciliation with Indigenous peoples. Music, like the singing I have been discussing today, can be a powerful social technology, as Michael Frischkopf has argued. Relationships between sacred music, religion, culture, and power come sharply into focus when studying Ukrainian churches in diaspora communities across Canada, whether considering issues of gender, language, or the place of culture and religion in this part of the world. I've been happy to share with you, even briefly, my early ethnomusicological explorations of Byzantine Ukrainian liturgical singing in Canada, and I hope that I have made the case to consider diaspora practices in sacred music studies, both for what they share with homeland and diaspora communities, and because, in the words of Hoofnagels, Johnson, and Klassen in their edited volume on musical traditions in Canada, quote, such localized ethnographic studies can be powerful tools in subverting cultural analyses that take imagined homogeneous cultural groups as their point of reference, end quote. And thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. And Marcy, I hope all questions you will receive at the end of our discussion, right? And thank you for your very interesting presentation. Now we are moving to the next presenter, Thea Tiramani. Our second presenter is Thea Tiramani, who earned her PhD in ethnomusicology from the University of Pavia in Italy. Her research focuses on music and migration, with particular attention to the Indian-originated Sikhs, and in Italy. She also studies Italian musical repertoire, specifically those related to the tradition of the Quattro province. So please, Theo, where are you? Please join us. We are waiting.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Yes, please welcome. Welcome.
See my presentation? It's okay? You can see? Okay.
Yes, we can see.
Thank you very much. Good evening, everyone. Hello from Italy. I'm so glad to attend this conference. Today, I'm presenting a small part of my PhD research on music in Sikh communities in Italy. I need to start my speech with a short but necessary introduction about music in Sikhism. Music has played an essential role in Sikhism since its origin in the second half of the 15th century, when Guru Nanak, the first Sikh guru, used to set prayers in music. The Guru Granth Sahib is the sacred book of Sikhism, and he is considered a living guru. You can see this super recent photo of 3 copies of the book Leaving Afghanistan after the facts that we all know, just because it is considered a living being. The book consists in almost 6,000 hymns to be performed in music. The book does not contain musical notation, but only the names of the rag that we should use to perform the related hymn. Shabd is the name for hymns. The musical performance of these hymns is called kirtan, and it is the most important moment during the religious ritual. Traditional forms of Sikh religious music, composition from the Guru's era, are called Gurbani Kirtan. Gurbani Kirtan is a repertoire established in northern India in pre-colonial times, orally transmitted from generation to generation of musicians. Only few of those melodies have survived to the present days and are performed by a small number of musicians. The current kirtan, both in India and in diaspora, is very different from the original one. It is mostly a congregational singing performed with instruments that are no longer traditional. Now the trend is to accompany the singing with the tabla and the harmonium, which replace traditional strings instruments. Also, rag theory is rarely respected. Only the text from the sacred book remains unchanged. Melodies are original or borrowed and transformed from popular melodies, Bollywood film soundtracks, and so on. Kirtanya, Sikh musicians, are continuously looking for music that can efficaciously move the devotee's spirituality. In Italy, Sikh migration is quite recent. Music in the Italian temples is provided by musicians from India and other European countries and a small number of local groups. The worshippers ask for known melodies from the most famous Sikh musicians in India, known for their online popularity. So, Sikh musicians set the hymns in famous and well-known tunes. Musicians need a music that works, that encourages the community participation in the ritual. My research mainly focuses on the second generation migrant, young Sikh born in Italy or born in India, but growing up in Italy. For young generations, music is one of the strongest and most important aspects of religious identity. Sikh temples in Italy offer musical courses to young generation to teach how to play kirtan and musical instruments, to educate future musicians. The study of Sikh second generations in Italy makes evident how much these young people need to communicate through new forms of expression, to combine an important cultural background with the new context, local but also global, in which they are. In this process, kirtan is variously employed. During my PhD, I've been lucky to meet two young musicians, Aninder Singh and Gurvinder Singh, that first in Italy decided to compose their own melodies to sing the sacred word of the book. They also produced a video clip to promote their composition. So let's start with presentation. Aninder Singh was born in 1994 in Punjab. He moved to Italy in 2008 when he was 14, and he gradually approached Sikhism, starting to attend the temple in Bergamo, in the north of Italy, where he lives. He started to learn music in Italy, in the temple. Now he is popular as a musician in many Italian temples and abroad. Sukatara, released on February 14, 2020 for Valentine's Day, is his first composition and the first original Sikh composition created in Italy. Gurvinder Singh was born in 1995 in Punjab. He studied music in India since he was a child. He moved to Italy in 2007 when he was 12. He lives near Arezzo, in the center of Italy. He teaches many students and plays in various temples in Italy and abroad. Rameya, released in March 2020, is his third composition. Aninder and Gurvinder, following new kirtan trend, did not respect the rag theory to compose the melodies. Both tried to create modern musical products with the aim to represent themselves and please the devotees. For both, it is also important to maintain the spirituality of the hymns. But how do they represent in a modern and personal way this spirituality? Let's start with Aninder composition. I show you a short clip from the video clip that is almost 11 minutes total.
तुद पावे ता नाम जपावे तुद पावे ता नाम जपावे सुख तेरा दिता नहीं है सुख तेरा दिता नहीं है सुख तेरा दिता नहीं है सुख तेरा दिता
Aninder composed a melody using his musical skills. He tried to express the meaning of the text in music. Like he said, first of all, I studied the meaning of the text, the message. This shabd is about the peace that God's presence can instill in man. I tried to convey the feeling of the text through the melody. I used notes of my favorite rags mixed together to create a peaceful melody. Melody is set in a 8-beat tal, the rhythm widely used in modern style of kirtan. Instruments are piano, harmonium, tabla, bansuri, tampura, diruba, guitar, bass, violin. It is interesting the use of the diruba. You can see in the picture the diruba, an instrument belonging to the Sikh musical tradition. Aninder says that he used this instrument to remember his roots and tradition. Anyway, Western instruments for Aninder are perfect to represent the mood of the text. The video clip is intentionally shot in Italy, in the places important for Aninder. We can see the natural landscapes near his home, the temple he attends, but also the places where his closest friends live. Like he says, for him, spirituality is peace, is a quiet state of mind, but it is also friendship and love for the place where you live. With his music, Aninder wanted to send a signal to the young Sikhs in Italy, inviting them to search for their own roots, but also their own present, cultural and musical. Like he said, the text says that you can find God everywhere. I wanted to represent that you don't just find him at the temple, you find him everywhere. God is present all around you, even in your home. I don't live in India, I live here in Italy. I chant my Indian-Italian way to find God. Now, Gurvinder video. Also his complete video is 11 minutes long. Gurvinder composition is an invocation to God, a request for forgiveness of sins. He composed a melody that represents the interrogative nature of the shabd, the invocation. Melody is set in an 8-beat tal and instruments are quite traditional. Gurvinder composed the shabd and realized the video clip with a specific aim, to be recognized as an Italian Sikh and to tell about the Italian musical scene outside of Italy. He said, I am a young Sikh, but I grew up in Italy. When I was 15, I started going out abroad to play music, and they asked me, where are you from? I said, from Italy. They made weird faces, and I said, why are you looking at me like that? Italy is beautiful. For me, Italy is the most beautiful country in the world. Outside, they think we don't have music, we don't pray. If I come from Italy, I have to represent Italy, the Sikhs of Italy. In this way, he hopes to address as many young Sikhs Italian as possible, hoping that they will find the desire to learn and engage with the practice of kirtan, a kirtan that could be an Italian one. I cannot go into the analysis of the two compositions here, but I can draw some conclusions. There are many motivations that pushed Aninder and Gurvinder to start the production of religious video clips. They are musicians, they are migrant, they want to express their identity, they want to be an example for new generations, they want to be recognized. But more important, they didn't just want to perform music that was a copy of someone else. They wanted to create a music that worked in the Italian context, in their context. Aninder and Gurvinder want to find new ways to express themselves, to tell their whole story. What remains is the religious spirit, the spirituality that passes through the daily life. It is an authentic, personal, and sincere spirituality. But do these music products work? Are they effective for praying? Yes. In addition to the large number of YouTube views, it's interesting that the Sikh devotees in Italy recast these songs. The two authors have created short versions of their songs to play with tabla and harmonium in the temples. The performances of the two young men, who now are creating new songs, are increasingly recasted in Italy. The worshippers sing this composition and pray, participate in the ritual, expressing in an authentic way a religion that is also the result of their being in Italy. This is a short example of an Aninder composition played in an Italian temple. You can listen to the devotees' participation on the chant.
Sukh tera ditta nahi hai, Sukh tera ditta nahi hai. Sare gaon kar Sukh tera ditta nahi hai, Sukh tera ditta nahi hai, Sukh tera ditta nahi hai, Sukh tera ditta nahi hai. Tudh paave ta naam jpave.
Okay, that's all. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much for two wonderful, thank you, Thea, lovely presentation. Thank you very much, Marcia, for beautiful presentation. So we have very good papers about migration and cultural preservation and so on. Any questions, please? Who's got the question? We've got some kind of, I hope it's the question. Jackson, please.
I read Yaksha's question first, I guess. Sorry, I see Irene has one too, but yes, both of these liturgies, oh no, sorry, Irene's, both the St. John's and St. Basil's are both at different times of year, different occasions. Is there a strong movement to make the liturgies available in English to attract Ukrainians born in Canada? Yeah, that's why they started, in fact. In the 1970s, the numbers were decreasing in attendance, and so that's one of the things. It was felt that if we did this in English or French in Quebec, then maybe people would come more. And then to think of the future of Jackson, Krelos is singing Canada. I think actually you're asking about whether it's going to, people will move the singing practices to be like monks in monasteries or like the local traditions. Yeah. So without wanting to take up too much of the time, a good part of Canada is served by monks. In fact, a monastic order, the western part especially, and then the rest of the Canada mostly by non-monastic orders. So there isn't necessarily a pressure to do that, to sing like monks.
No, to sing like monks. I had an opportunity to go to visit Ukrainian churches in Edmonton a few times in the 2010s because my sister lives there, and Yeah, and for example, I visited a Bosnian Ukrainian parish in Edmonton. They are refugees from 1990s from the war here in our countries, unfortunately, and they tried to keep their own diacsy and cleros traditions. But in other parishes, I didn't see so much differences in cleros singing or diac singing between each parishes in Edmonton.
Yeah, I think
I thought it was very, very unified. Because I compared it to the situation of Ukrainians and Russians in Croatia, where every parish keep its own traditions.
And I have also visited some of those communities in Croatia. Ukrainian is very, I would say, strongly governed is a bit too strong of a word, but by this monastic order, the Basilian priests. There are a few churches that are non-Basilian, served by non-Basilians, and they have slightly different practices. There is perhaps the most different practice outside of Toronto in a parish in Brampton, and there the priest and his son, who's the cantor, and their family, they make great efforts, and they're very proud of a very unique chant practice that draws on Galician practices, which is not so common across the rest of the country. Just to say that in Edmonton, I'm not surprised that you found things quite uniform. The Basilian order, in fact, had their monastery outside of Edmonton, and there's a very strong Basilian influence in that region. But there are differences across the country. It's hard to say how much. And certainly, every priest is different. It depends on who's the cantor and other kinds of needs and things that are happening in each community. So it's interesting. I look forward to talking with you more, Yaksha.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Thanks for the question, both of you and
very much. Now we have a question to Thea, right? Thea, please.
Thea. Is Thea.
Thea, yes.
I think I studied the reaction to the YouTube video from Aninder and Gurvinder, and yes, the comments are prevalent from Italy, but anyway, some comments are from India and from European countries. So I think they are the first attempt to make themselves known in all Europe and India, but now new shabd, new melodies from Gurvinder and Aninder are known by a lot of musicians also from India. So yeah.
Thank you very much. I have
I was just going to say that there's a pretty strong Sikh community in California, and there's some articles on the Gurdwara practices among the immigrants in California that's interesting. And Indrajit Kaur has, works on the Sikh. Yeah, so you would find each other's work very interesting to compare, probably.
I think that Italy situation is interesting because we are the first generation migrants, so it's quite different from the situation in USA, because in Italy it's a new start for Sikh, because they are trying to create communities and they are trying to do experiment with their music.
Yeah, that was very interesting. So I'm guessing they made a recording and then they used the recording with the music video.
Sorry?
They make a recording, like a CD or digital recording, and then...
No. In Italy, no. They made video clip, but we have...
Not recording.
Not recording, no.
Oh, because you could hear all the instruments, but you could only see the image of the, harmonium player.
Yeah, and the video are 11 minutes, so you can find YouTube if you want. You can listen.
See the other
find all
instruments.
this. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. That was very interesting.
There is another question to you, Thea.
Yeah.
But yes, I have a question which is closely related to it. How big is Sikh community in Italy? What's the number?
the second communities in Europe. Yeah.
Oh,
it's-
really? The second one.
yeah.
But how
Uh,
many thousands?
A lot. I think I don't remember the number specific, but the second in Europe, because it's difficult to find the number of Indian people that profess Sikhism. So it's quite difficult to have a number. But in Italy, in Indian migration at the seven is the seven migration group in Italy, and it is the second in Europe. Yeah.
Thank you very much. There is another question to you. Have you seen it?
How would you situate or categorize it? Yeah, it's the same that I said about USA, because in England is a migration that started a long time ago. So a lot of Italian Sikhs try to hope to go to England or to USA, but there are a lot of young generation that want to stay in Italy. They wanted to create a community that is strong in Italy. So it is interesting because first generation migrant wants to go abroad, but second generation now wanted to stay in Italy.
Thank you very much. I have a question to Marcia. Marcia, it was very interesting to learn about the way of the preservation of the Ukrainian national identity by the Byzantine Congregational Church music, right? What about the folk music? Ukrainian folk musics are so strong, so powerful. I remember once I went to the reception of the Visiting Art magazine in London, and I was invited there, and for the entertaining, they invited the Ukrainian choir. And when they started to sing, Reveta stogne Dnipr shirokий, you know, the whole audience was in tears. It was such a powerful performance. We all were sure this is the Ukrainian choir from the Ukraine. And to our amusement, we found that they were just diaspora, you know, local diaspora living in England. So Ukrainian choir in England is so wonderful, you know, such a high quality. So what about folk music?
I think that's a complicated question, Razia. I mean, certainly there's a lot of folkloric music in all over Canada. There are three main immigration groups in Canada, and then a fourth, what's known as a trickle, people call it. So before World War I, and then in between the two wars, and then after the Second World War, the DPs, displaced persons. And then in the 80s and continuing, you know, especially since 90, there's been this kind of like trickle, right? And there are competing interests and values related to what are musics. And I mean, the people who immigrated before World War I mean, there wasn't even a nation state called Ukraine at that time. That's not to say there weren't Ukrainians, but they were also called many different sorts of things, right? You know, Rusine or Halechane or what, I mean, many other regional names, right? And then after World War I, there was a choir that in fact circulated from an established independent autonomous nation state of Ukraine, which is about half the size of what it is now, that they circulated, including a stop in London, and were performing to gain funds and international political support to support an autonomous Ukrainian nation state. So that song is, you know, maybe one of the unofficial anthem songs of these choirs that have, you know, they still sing them everywhere in the world where I know they're Ukrainians, Australia, Brazil, United States, Canada, Croatia, everywhere, right? So that is a folkloric song that was set, you know, to through composed, I would say it's not folk music anymore, or whatever that means, right? So, and then, you know, the University of, I mean, there's so much more to be said, and I know that many of you actually have connections to people like Andrina Hachevsky or Brian Cherwick, who have presented on this in SEM and ICTM for years. But, you know, at the University of Alberta, which has one of two Ukrainian studies programs in Canada that's really strong. Oh, there's another one. Alberta, Manitoba, and Toronto, there may be the strongest. In Alberta, you know, Andrina Hachevsky set up this ethnology chair, and there's a folklore program there for like since the 1980s, on the heels of multiculturalism being inscribed in the Canadian Constitution that was repatriated in the 1982. So anyway, just to say, you know, and around 2000, we had a conference of all the social sciences, humanities at the University of Alberta, and many different conference groups met. Then they meet all together every year in one place, and that's what this was. So I attended the Folklore Association meeting, and someone was presenting about folkloric music. And one of the Ukrainian studies scholars, an older person who had been a displaced person herself, and she, I think, was a literature scholar, she stood up and said, all right. We know about these Ukrainian folkloric musics, but what about our classical musics? Like, do we have to tell everybody about this folklore? And I was just like, this isn't a folklore conference, right? Just to say that these things are still being negotiated. But certainly there's a really strong folkloric, you know, musics, but the folkloric musics also include, like, you know, synthesizers and, you know, the most modern instruments. So it's these are bigger questions, Razia, maybe.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much to everyone, and sorry to keep you waiting the end of our panel, but I mean, my impression was that we had such a wonderful presentation that so many questions are coming out, but perhaps in the communication, you know, email communication, we will try to answer many of those questions. Thank you very much for organizers. Thank you for Svanibor for being a leader in such a highly innovative, you know, establishment of the new ICTM study group. So all the best to you and good evening. I don't know what time of the day or the night in your place, but good evening to everyone. Take care and hope to see you in the further panels. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you.